welcome to the Children, Adults, Health and Wellbeing Policy Development and Scrutiny panel. Okay, so as I usually do, I shall go round the room and I will ask the councillors and members of the panel to introduce themselves, and then if you could then let us know who you are when you speak, I would be very grateful. Thank you very much. So my name is Dina Romero and I'm a councillor in Southdown and I chair this panel. Liz.
Good morning, my name is Liz Hardman. I'm Vice Chair of this panel and I'm also Councillor for Poulton.
Good morning, I'm Councillor Onkar Seni and just a committee member.
David Harding, Councillor for the Chew Valley Ward.
Councillor Joanna Wright, Lambridge Ward.
Councillor Paul Crossley, Southdown.
Can you put your microphone on? Okay. So someone will come and sort you out in a second. We'll come back to you. Kevin.
Good morning. Kevin Burnett, Professional Association representative for the NEHT, co-opted member and a non-voting member of the panel.
Thank you, Kevin. Chris. Come back to you, Chris. Yes. Leslie.
Morning, Councillor Leslie Mansell, Radstock Ward.
And we're supported by Mark.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mark Durnford. I'm the Democratic Services Officer for the panel.
Good morning, Kerry Williams, and I provide the Scrutiny Officer support to the panel.
Thank you. Barrett? No? No, it is working.
Councillor Barrett Pankanya, Cumdan Ward.
Chris, was yours started to work again?
Christopher Batten, National Education Union, non-voting member.
Thank you, Chris. Now, just one more thing. Obviously, this meeting is being webcast. The cameras follow the microphone that's on, so can you make sure that if you are not speaking, you've turned your microphone off, but obviously turn it on when you are speaking. And if you don't wish to be recorded, then please would you let our tech guys know. Thank you. We now move on to the emergency procedure.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Chair. So, if the continuous alarm does sound, you must evacuate the building and proceed to the assembly point. From this room, you follow the green running person signs to the exit, using either the marble staircase or the main staircase. Please do not use the lifts. The assembly point for this building is the Orange Grove grassed area, just outside Brown's Restaurant. And there's an evacuation chair for use by disabled people who so wish in the corridor outside the Council Chamber Public Gallery. Alternatively, the area at the top of the marble staircase has been designated a safe refuge where persons needing assistance should assemble. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mark. Apologies for absence and substitutions.
Just one that you informed me of, Councillor Orton, not available today.
Thank you. So we now move on to declarations of interest. Kevin.
Thank you, Chair. To declare that as Branch Secretary of the NEHT, I have an interest in the issue around Ofsted. Thank you.
I have no urgent business, so then we move on to public or councillor statements and questions. I know that questions were submitted by Saskia and Joanna Wright, so and I believe the answers have also been circulated. So I now move to John Gore, who is from the Orchestra of Everything, who has come to give us an update. Thank you, John.
Thank you. Just to give you a quick update, I was here in July telling you about our Orchestra of Everything Foundation that brings music lessons to children, in effect children that can't afford music lessons. Most of our work is in St Michael's in Twerton. And if you remember, that was the school where 80% of children had signed up for lessons with us, and the head teacher had told us that 86% of them had a more positive attitude to learning across the curriculum as a result of the music. So you increase resilience, confidence, focus. We continue, so we've stepped up our work in St Michael's. We have our first army of volunteers trained up and about to go in on a Wednesday to give every child the chance to practice their instrument. So as well as their Friday lessons, they will get practice and they'll get an after-school club. We have found a small amount of funding to start something similar in Round Hill Primary School, a mile up the road in Whiteway, which is an area of similar disadvantage, and we expect that we will find the same issues when we start. So we're starting with just Year 6, and our funding takes us to February half term, which is enough to get going and we hope give us some time to find more. If you remember, in July I talked about how the Police Early Intervention Team and Violence Reduction Partnership had contacted us and said, you know, we want to get involved with the particularly at-risk young people. We are about to start a youth club with Youth Connect Southwest at Southside Centre. We have a joint funding bid went in, so we find out at Christmas, but in the meantime we're going to start a pilot just focused on the children who have left St Michael's, so we don't lose them. But we recognise that's not enough. You know, the issues that the Violence Reduction Partnership we're talking about is not enough just to give them one club a week. So I'm in contact with various community venues, Bath City Farm, the Lighthouse Centre, Southdown Methodist Church, with the aim of setting up a whole infrastructure, volunteer run, where the young people can go and there's a set of instruments that they can practice, they can have a snack, they can catch up with friends, they can do homework, the things that they wouldn't be able to do at home. So that's early stages, but that's the vision for the next 6 to 12 months. Funding is much more positive than when I was last here. We've had good news from the Roper Foundation, from the Medlock Trust, from the Rotary Club. We are entirely funded for our work at St Michael's for the academic year until September, and more than 50% funded until the end of 2028. So we're now looking to do something similar at Round Hill. So that's what we need now, and I'm hoping we'll get an introduction to Councillor Ball or Councillor Guy around the 2 million that's earmarked for Twerton, and this could be part of what we could be part of that. And we're going to need our first set of costs to help with infrastructure. We've been volunteer run up to this point, but we have an explosion of volunteers through the university, music societies, all over the place. I'm at the 3SG fair on Friday, and I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of this week we have anywhere between 50 and 100 volunteers. So at that point we'll need a small amount of core costs for a volunteer coordinator. Thank you.
Well, thank you, John. That sounds absolutely amazing and so much more positive than when you last spoke to us. So just for clarification, you're talking about the 3SG Volunteers Fair on Friday, and that's where you're going to gather many volunteers from the university.
So it's two things. I've visited the Bath University Music Societies, 3 out of their 4 music groups, so we have 24 students signed up. And that's before I visited the orchestra, which is on Wednesday. So I'm expecting a good 30 or 40 just from the Bath University Music Societies. And then there's the volunteer fair, and then there is Bath Spa and various other activities going on around that.
Wow, that sounds absolutely fantastic. Any questions, Liz?
John, your enthusiasm and energy never fails to inspire me, and it's just incredible. So thank you for what you're doing for all these children, because as we've said so often in this committee, it's the extra things that help children's attainment, especially children in St Michael's, where there's a huge portion of free school meals, and you're bringing those extra activities, music, into the curriculum. And there are 2 things I wanted to say to you. Firstly, I have actually written to Councillors Tim Ball and Sarah Moore to say there's all this money, and I've given them your email address with your permission, and I've said you're ready and waiting to hear and work with them as to this extra money from the government as to how it's going to be spent. So I'm hoping you will hear from them. And then I'm not sure if I heard, but you're expanding what you do into, is it other schools nearby, Roundhill, I believe, and I just wondered, could you explain a little bit about that, and have you the money for that as well?
Yes. We get lots of requests to do what we're doing in other schools, and actually my focus is Twerton and Whiteway. So we're not looking to expand everywhere, but we are looking to expand into primary schools in Twerton and Whiteway, plus youth clubs, plus through Councillor Lynch's team, we're part of the wraparound bid for the DWP funding for 18 to 24s, not in education. So my aim, and then to get into adults. So this is stage 2 in the journey, is to go to Roundhill. We have in the region of £4,500, which will take us to February half term for just year 6. So there's 30 children in year 6. The reason that we wanted to rush in is because their year is crammed, and as you know, with SATs and transition into secondary school, and we're almost up against the end of the window where, if we get beyond half term, it's not worth doing it. Really, they don't get to. So that's why we said to the head teacher, "Are you happy to take this risk?" That the head teacher of St Michael's took. That we can only guarantee that we can do this for 3 months. But we're confident with everything else going on that we will be, by the time we get to Christmas, we'll be able to extend it further. The aim would be to do the entire St Michael's programme at Roundhill. And actually, the St Michael's programme only really starts in year 4. We don't do very much with year 3. What we would love to do is take everything a year earlier. And the reason for that is funding. The reason for that is our capacity. We know, and we've spoken with the head teacher, we know how powerful it would be to help. With St Michael's, they have so many children who have difficulties transferring into junior school. They have so many behaviours, just difficult behaviours that they see on a daily basis that then impacts the whole of the rest of the school. So, if we can bring music into year 3, then that's even more powerful. And then I'll be happy if we're in with those 2 schools, the entire year groups.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
And just before I bring about Pancania in, Paul Crossley and I, we're both councillors in Southdown, which is where Roundhill School is, which actually, as we know, serves children, in the Whiteway and Twerton area too. And it may well be that that £20 million that was announced will also cover some of the work in that area too. But we're waiting, Paul and I are waiting for details on that. But, please pick up the conversation with us as well. Okay, thank you. Councillor Pancania.
Can I ask, you are linked with Voices for Life, or not?
Sorry, we're linked in with Voices for Life. They are doing a programme in year 4 in both schools. Actually, it's messy because the numbers at St Michael's mean that half of year 4 are in one class and half are in another class. The suggestion from the St Michael's head teacher, Becky Mellor, who you met last time, was to actually, for us to, for our capacity and for our funding, to focus on the older children in more schools and to do something more light touch with the year 4s who have got Voices for Life. So we're putting together a programme where we've actually suggested that some funding earmarked for us goes to Voices for Life so they can extend their programme across the whole year. They have an orchestra accompanying in their Abbey concert. So that's a great springboard for us to say, look at these musical instruments that you're seeing and hearing and performing alongside. Now let's bring them in and run some workshops. So that year 4 then becomes a discover the instruments year. And by the end of that process in the summer, we say, right, give us your top 3, give us your least favourite 3, and then we'll schedule you in the following year. I've started conversations with Tessa Armstrong, who runs it, around how could we move that a year earlier. So when I talk about wanting to start with year 3, would that be an appropriate point for her to move her choir? So rather than year 4, she does that in year 3 as well, and that's the collaborative singing and discover the orchestra year. We're just exploring that.
The reason why I asked, and for this committee to know, is I'm working with Tessa Armstrong. What we want to do is do a sort of longitudinal study. The longitudinal study being that we mark where the attainment level and where the abilities were at the start, and then follow this cohort through and compare it with a similar group who have not engaged in Voices for Life or music or similar, and then at the end of that analysis to demonstrate with evidence whether this intervention, the music, is of benefit. And what I mean by that, of course, we know that, but, you know, whilst we say it is really good, we want to come to this chamber here and say, let me show you how good it is, because the implications are that if you can demonstrate it through a study like the one we are going to do, it has implications locally as well as nationally, in that you can now show with evidence. You had a group of people, you compared one group with intervention, one group without intervention, you followed them through over a course of 2 to 3 years, and then you followed their outcomes, whatever the outcomes we decide are, and then we can say, well, actually, the level of improved attainment was of such and such level of so many degrees worth. So that's what we're going to do with Tessa.
I'd very much be interested in becoming part of that. I had a meeting with Systema Scotland that run a much larger programme doing something similar, and they've given me some details about their metrics and KPIs and their measurement frameworks, so it'd be really interesting to get involved and to see how you can separate out the music activity from all the other interventions that will be going on at the same time. So yeah, I'd love to. Thank you.
Well, thank you, John. I'm not seeing anybody else who wants to ask a question, but I think just for, you know, our own, well, it's always nice to have something kind of uplifting, isn't it, at the beginning of our meetings. So if you would like to come and speak to us again at any time and just give us any further updates, you'll be more than welcome. So thank you, and well done for all the work that you're doing. Okay, so I'm moving the next item, the minutes, to the end of the meeting, and now I'll move on to the Cabinet members' update. Paul, is there anything you wanted to add to the report that's already been circulated?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just with regards to John, you asked me to make sure that we were making sure that the officers worked effectively with John moving forward, and I'm pleased to say that we've been doing that. Including possible external bids for funding for the orchestra. So I think it's really important that we actually do see this as something that is major in terms of those schools with disadvantaged pupils. And I think it's great work that he's doing. So I'm sorry I've gone on to that. I'm going to start off by talking about school streets. I've been asked a question about school streets. I received a full briefing from the officers late, so I haven't been able to circulate it out to members. But basically, I think the committee really knows quite well the background to school streets. The schools that will be included are, they've got a feasibility of the road network, progress towards achieving good modal shift STARS accreditation, and availability of staff or volunteers to manage the access barriers. Some funding that we've got available is £250,000 from the Clean Air Zone, £87,000 one-off revenue funding for 25-26, and £75,000 from the WECA Active Travel Fund. I'll give the paper to Mark to circulate out to everybody, but it really only states what I think the committee already knows. But I understand, because I think we were being asked around which schools were involved. I haven't been given that information because I understand, because it's another committee, they're going to be making a statement this week about which schools are going to be involved who've gone through that process. So I apologise I can't give that final information to the committee today. The other item I wanted to just raise before I went on to my report in a little bit more detail is about Alice Park. We've mentioned at the corporate parents meeting the issue of the Tree of Hope, the sapling and the planting of that. That will be in February 26. And great credit to Councillor Wright for the work that she's done on this. But I am pleased to say that I'm talking to the business and skills team. Remember last time we met, Claire came along about trying to get a joint event to pick up around NEETs in that part of Bath. And we've got some funding from the Youth Trailblazer that we'll be able to put that information out to the Alice Park Trust to see whether we can actually organise some event there. I've looked at my report, and we've talked several times about safety valve. We heard from our last submission, which was, I think, was about the third or fourth one we've done from the Department for Education. They said that they were going to be referring it through to ministers now, with, I think, a recommendation for approval to get back into safety valve. But at the moment, we haven't heard anything back because that's something that we're still waiting to hear back from the ministers. The other thing I just wanted to briefly mention is that there are some real issues that St John's Foundation have provided a lot of support to this local authority, particularly through Language for Life, and it does appear that they're having some rethinking about what they can actually support moving forward. So there are discussions going on with them to see whether we can actually get that extended beyond the July 26th deadline, which is funded to date. And the final point, just before I go into my report, so I'm sorry, there's a lot of one-off issues, is that we have the virtual school, and I'm on that board, and so's your vice chair. And there's a suggestion that we've made that we're joined by you as the chair, and I think you've agreed to that. So really, just so the committee knows that we're just afraid that if something happened with one or two of us couldn't make it, two is quite a small number on the virtual school board. So those are just some of the starting points before I come into my report, and I apologise on that, Chair. The first thing I wanted to do on my report is to introduce you to Jean. Jean is now Mary. She's joined us as the new Director of Children's Services, and it's her first opportunity to talk to the committee, and I didn't want the meeting just to start and you not know who she was, and also to introduce Phoebe, who's taken over from Lee. So I'm not going to go through introducing everybody because you probably know Chris Wilford, but I thought it would be rather nice just to say a big welcome from me to the committee for the support we're getting moving forward on people. You met Darryl at the last meeting, I understand, the adult section. The inspection of the local authority is on the main agenda. And I think it's a positive report, but from my point of view, in particular, with so many changes at senior management level, it was quite a fraught time for us, and we had the support of Chris, who stood in on an interim role during that period of time, and Jean was there very much just towards the end of it, so she heard the summary and the feedback. And from my point of view, in terms of setting some strategic targets moving forward, that's given us a good base as a local authority with getting good rating to, in actual fact, move into outstanding at some stage in the future, because that should be always be our aim, to be improving as time goes on. So I'm sorry to, if you like, play politics around that, but I think it is important that we have that ambition as a local authority. The new Ofsted early years, there's just a couple of things I wanted to mention on that. One is it's good that they're now putting academies into that list, because it's always been, Ofsted inspections have been around schools, but now they're including academies. I think that's something which we got to say is something really positive. And also the other issue is, and I think we ought to be coming back with a report as soon as we can, around inclusion in schools. But I think it's also an issue for us around inclusion for how we run children's services. So I think that was something that I thought would be really quite sensible for us to perhaps put into the forward programme when we have a discussion with Jean moving forward. Otherwise, I think I'll take any questions anybody's got to make. I think I can answer, hopefully, most things. If I can't, I've certainly got a good team around me, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor May, who is the Cabinet Member for Children's Services, and I'm sure we'll be turning his microphone off. Thank you. So, yes, we've got a number of questions. I'm going with Councillor Harding first, then Onkar, and then Kevin, and then Liz.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Paul. With respect to the SEND AP teams, are they having any effect on exclusion and youth justice at all?
Yes, I think everybody is, and I think we've got the report later on. Can we perhaps answer that in a bit more detail when we get there? Because the SEND AP team, where some national trends have been increasing in numbers of exclusions and suspensions, our efforts of actually working with schools to actually make that a better situation. So Sarah will deal with that later on in a bit more detail, if that's all right with you, David. Thank you.
Thank you. Onkar.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the Cabinet update. So just a question around free school meal. So after this auto-enrollment exercise, how many eligible children are still not enrolled for the free school meals, and what steps will be taken to identify and reach those remaining families?
I think that's a really good question. Thank you, Onkar. I think we put out a table which showed the number that had been achieved and made mention about the opt-out. What I'm going to be asking Jean to do is to provide for a feedback around which parents have opted out in which wards, because I think that would be a sensible thing moving forward, so that we can actually see what the opt-out is. But this was a council decision from all parties to do the automated free school meals, and I think it's great credit to everybody in this room that has made such progress moving forward.
Jean.
Thank you. So we'd like to come back and report on that. We don't have those figures, that information right now, but we are looking at it in order to provide it.
And actually, do we know if government, who have been asked about this, whether they are looking to roll out auto-enrolment on free school meals?
I think so.
I take that one. There was a motion that was put forward, I believe, by a group of MPs to make sure that it was. I haven't heard that it's made any progress at this moment in time, but I can certainly ask my colleagues around that. We're really pleased that we've taken it on ourselves to be able to deliver that programme. It's you know, a really good piece of work. Just coming back to the original question, I'd like to think we've identified all the children who are eligible now. So that was the point of the actual exercise, using that information. But obviously that we will never know what we don't know around that. We only had a handful that actually opted out. So after we had identified them, and I think the request is to identify which wards they were in. We may not specifically know all the reasons why they decided not to, but where we have got that recorded, we can feed that back. But we're really pleased. I think this has been a really good piece of work to drive forward this and make sure that we have as many children as we can opted into the system.
Absolutely. No, thank you very much, Chris. And yeah, I think we'll sort of follow this with interest. Yeah.
Chair, can I just come in?
Yes.
Sorry, didn't mean to cut across, but I think this is important. We found that there are 139 new cases which were parents and children who weren't receiving that and now are, and I think that's really great news. But of course this is something that is going to be a permanent system moving forward, because there's going to be new children coming into the system all the time. So it is not just this one-off, this is a snapshot, but it is about having the system for the future, and I think that's really positive. And I think it was a great initiative that was brought forward. I seem to remember by the Labour group originally, but supported across all parties moving forward.
Absolutely. Right. And I think actually that piece of work to just see if there's any particular trends in why people then are still not choosing to take up the offer of the free school meal, because obviously there's pupil premium that's associated with it and other sort of benefits to both the children and also to the school itself, isn't there? So, yeah. Okay. So, next on my list I've got Liz. Kevin. All right, well, I will go with Kevin.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you again, Paul. Very full report. A couple of questions around the election report and the other tenders, but that's later on. Can I just, three particular points for the first part of the report. One is to say, obviously, well done to the team for their great Ofsted. Good is not just good, it's pretty brilliant to get to good, and is, if you like, is as expected nowadays, but it takes an awful lot of work, so congratulations to everybody for that. Thinking around Ofsted, and you made a mention in your framework about support for colleagues, particularly in schools and things around the new framework. Just wanted to make the point, and I'm sure that Chris may be already on this as usual, because he's always a step ahead of the game, that we have asked, due to Ruth Perry's death and the coroner's report comments, that we are pushing a very public and national campaign on changing how the accountability system actually operates into one which is supportive and progressive and does well for everybody and doesn't lead to very sad and tragic things at the end. So hopefully the council and yourself will be supporting how that risk assessments are put together, and that you as an employer will be pushing as well nationally for that to happen. So a few comments from you around that would be much appreciated. And the last thing really is around families first and resourcing. I believe that when it was first announced, there was a comment made that there didn't seem to be enough resources to make this work. And as I read through the papers for this meeting, there seemed to be things, if you put the Ofsted report on the children's services and around management, and maybe for a moment taking the eye off the ball around other big change programmes that are happening, and there are lots of things happening. My concern is that, again, new programmes come in, and it's rather like shuffling the deck chairs on the Titanic. We are trying to make the most of nothing that's there, but we do need to sort of think about, have we got those resources? Is it practical? And, you know, and how much of it is changing the way we work and other things that actually do need additional resources?
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and answer those. The first one, I think, is an emotional response. I saw the tension and the commitment of everybody in the department around the Ofsted inspection of this local authority. And taking your point, you can't just sit there and say, oh, well, it's good, and then we move on. It is something where everybody is committed to children and they're doing their best, and that's the whole team. And under those circumstances, I understand the circumstances, and just our neighbours in Swindon went from being good to the worst category, and I saw the impact that had on the people who worked there. So from our point of view, there was great relief, but that's a politician answering. But for the people who work in the organisation, they really care about children, and to actually then get the badge that you are good, I think is really great credit to everybody in the department, not me. So I take up your point about the pressure. We're a member of a group called F40, which is a body that puts pressure onto the government, and they've been supporting the whole concept around the future of inspections in schools. But I was trying to pick up in my report the impact for us in terms of a local authority, because we do need to be developing our reaction towards particularly inclusion, I think, as a local authority, as well as in terms of children. The other issue around Families First and funding, there's a new funding regime, fair funding, and I think some of the funding is going to be external to the fair funding issue around children's services. But I think the fundamentals behind Families First are absolutely sound, and we will do what we can, and that's why I put a brief reference to it, but we can give more information if you want it today around Families First. But I think the funding for this is something that is, like everything else from governments, I say plural, but you know, there's never enough funding to do everything that you want to do, but it is an important move forward, I think, for us to be rethinking how our social care is actually provided in the future. And if that's an improvement, then that's great. So I'm not going to sit here complaining about funding, Chair. I think it's a good move, and I think we should be working what we can to achieve it. That's why I've got Phoebe here as well as Jean. So I don't know whether, would you like us to give a bit more information about that, Chair?
A little, but I was also conscious that this is a piece of work that the task group is focusing on, so we can also pick up more of the detail in that as well. So we're doing a task group that's looking at early help and support, which somewhat mirrors the work that Families First is doing. Jean and then Phoebe.
So just a couple of things. So in terms of the inspection regime, and following Ruth Perry's death, there was a great deal of training that inspectorates underwent, particularly in Ofsted, to really think about a restorative approach to a much more strengths-based approach to how they undertook inspections. We know since that time that experiences have been variable as a result of that. So I would agree there's more work to be done. And in terms of inspections in schools, we really support that continued approach to a strengths-based approach. Obviously, it needs to be challenging, but within a really thoughtful context. And where that's done well, it's local authorities and schools have really benefited. In terms of the Families First reforms, we are working hard in developing those, and we would welcome the opportunity of sharing it here or in any other forum in terms of the progress that we are making and what our plans are. We have had government funding to support this developmental year, and of course every local authority will receive a different amount depending on the size of each local authority. So the funding we've had is not a huge amount of money, but it is supporting some of that development so that we can realign, reimagine our services so that we're ready to provide what we need to by the first deadline, which is the 1st of April. But I think that it's really clear that the Family First reforms are part of a major legislative change within the Children's Wellbeing in Schools Bill that will reach well beyond the 1st of April. So we need to announce what our initial changes will be, and we will be developing those way beyond the 1st of April as a service and as a partnership in delivering preventative services to children so that they don't escalate in need and require statutory responses. And we're very much committed to that. And our approach, our practice approach, very much mirrors that desire to work preventatively with families. So we're already well positioned to transform our services or realign our services in order to be able to deliver that in the way that's required.
Thank you, Jean. I'm not sure, Jean, that you either... I know that you were sort of alluded to by Councillor May, but I don't know if you actually were properly sort of formally announced. So you're Jean Kelly of...
Apologies, I'm Jean Kelly, Director of Children's Services. Yeah, apologies.
So, and that's my fault as well for not reminding everybody to, the first time you speak, if you could just say who you are. I didn't know, Phoebe, if you wanted to add anything, and then otherwise I'll pass on to Chris.
I think Jean's covered it well, thank you.
Chris.
Thank you. Yeah, just following up on...
And sorry, who are you?
Chris Wilford, Director of Education for Baines. Some of you might know me. So just coming back to Kevin's question around the Ofsted inspection framework and in relation to us as an employer, in relation to our own head teachers, yes. Already had some correspondence conversations with colleagues who are in leadership positions in our schools. I'm going to join one of their hub meetings and we invite my colleagues from health and safety who support us with doing risk assessments around wellbeing. So we'll certainly take a look at how we can support staff who have got any concerns or anxieties about managing that. Inspection is an incredibly tough process. Head teachers need to be supported through that work, and certainly when I've gone into schools that have been inspected recently, I'm always asking questions about the approach of inspectors. And the last few that I have, I do think I have seen a slight, not slight the wrong word, but I have seen a different approach from some of the inspected teams that have gone in. However, when they changed the framework again, it heightens anxiety. It only seemed like a minute ago we were in 2020 and they introduced the last inspection framework, which I think nearly all the schools in Baines have gone through now. So we'll certainly work with the head teachers locally on that. We also provide a range of other support, so we will support schools around SEND and inclusion, which is obviously going to be a part of the new framework, and we see that as an opportunity for us to really get into more schools, and we'll certainly be promoting that. We also will be working with Ofsted, like we always do, to enable them to work across the region. We'll invite them to head teachers' briefings to come along and talk about the framework, and we'll facilitate as much support as we can in different ways. So very much thinking about head teachers, thinking about how we can support the framework through more support for SEND inclusion, what we're already doing, and also making sure that we support the wider rollout of the framework in a supportive way. It's happening. It's one of those things, and learning to live with inspection is something that we try and do well.
Thank you. I feel that's a very full response. It's going to get fuller, is it, Paul? Okay. Right. So the next question is from Liz.
Thank you very much. And Chris, thank you for that about inclusion. Hopefully when Sarah looks at her report and presents her report, you might add a bit more detail about what the local authority is going to offer regarding inclusion. So Paul, getting back to you, I did want to add, but I didn't want to stop your flow, about school streets. And I know this is one that kind of crosses over between us and Climate and Emergency Panel. And I just wondered, are all the school streets in Bath? I mean, is there any opportunity for school streets outside of Bath? I know my ward of Porton would fit in really well, and I'm sure there are other wards in North East Somerset. So maybe that's not a question for you. Maybe that's a question that we need to put for the Climate and Emergency Panel. So,
I think that's a good question. I haven't been given that information. As you know, it is another committee. But as soon as we find out later on this week which schools are involved, I'm assuming, and you're probably assuming, that it will be mainly streets in Bath. But I know from my schools, they're both on a main road, the A37, and it would be impossible to bring in school streets for them. But we do find there's associated problems with parents driving to schools. So there's a whole range of issues which are bad in terms of the climate, but also in terms of the impact on local streets when that happens. But it is something that is a really great initiative, and has been supported by this committee for a long time. But I find it a bit embarrassing that I can't give you a direct answer to your question, because I just genuinely don't know at this stage. The information I was given did not give me that information. As soon as I've got it, I'll make sure that the committee, through Mark, get the information when it goes out, if that's all right.
I suspect the papers will be released on this coming Thursday, because their meeting is on Thursday the 23rd, so next week on the Thursday. So I'm sure that information will be available at that point. But I'm sure we'll watch online and hopefully all will be revealed. But thank you, Paul, for your answer.
I've got 3 questions now, Paul, and they are on the special educational needs part of the report, and thank you for including that report on what we're doing for SEND, because it was quite comprehensive. The first thing is that looking at our young people with special needs, for example, those with autism, SEMH, speech and language, that the numbers have increased. I think it's probably true for all of the local authorities, but these numbers have increased, and especially those with an EHCP, especially those with these types of autistic SEMH and speech and language problems. But our special schools are full, and they are being educated under what's called Section 19, whilst they wait for special placements. So, firstly, what is Section 19? How many of these children are there? And how are they being educated? Are they being educated at home or some sort of other alternative provisions? That's my first question. Thank you.
That's a detailed question. Can I ask Sarah to respond, please, Chair?
Hello, I'm Sarah Gunner. I'm a virtual school head teacher, but I also oversee the alternative learning team in the local authority. So I oversee this cohort, Liz. So EOTUS Section 19 as education other than at school. Currently, we have 90 children who are accessing education other than at school. They all have a different variety of packages depending on their needs. So some may be accessing online learning, some may be accessing alternative provision. And we have 2 advisory teachers within the local authority that sit in my team who go out and visit them 3 times a year to assess the quality of that education. Does that answer it for you?
That's okay. Yes, it does, but my question, my kind of supplementary question would be, are they getting full-time education? Is it part-time education? Is some of this education at home? Did you say 90 children? Right, thank you.
Yes, so they are getting full-time education. It's not at home. There's a very clear distinction between being electively home educated, which also sits within our alternative learning team, and those that are open to EOTUS or Section 19, and that will be named on their EHCP.
Thank you very much. That's really very welcome. I have another question. I think Paul may wants to say
Chair, can I just give a bit more information? I understand this is not such a major issue in Bath and North East Somerset, but in other parts of the country it is. And the government are taking a white paper through in terms of getting implementation about registration of children at home, and that then would change the nature of our role with those home-educated children. So it is an important process that's going to be through, but it won't be until probably after the next local election before that's implemented, because it's got to go through the House of Lords, and there's all sorts of complications around it. But it is something that is nationally is a major issue that's moving forward.
So that was about elective home-educated children, isn't it?
Okay, thank you for that. My second question is that there's a mental health support team which is going into schools, which is really good to hear about, and that 20 schools have been added. But then further on in the report, it says that 41 schools plus Bath College are being helped by this mental health support team. So that's another 20 schools, and I just wonder, how are these schools identified? Are they mainly secondary schools? Are they primary schools? And it's good to hear about this because we know about mental health being a really big issue and concern in schools. So I just wanted a bit more information about this.
So are you fighting over who's going to answer?
Me. Thank you, and a very good question. Just going to hop back to the OTAS Section 19 question, just to provide reassurance that Sarah and the team and the SEN team are constantly reviewing those packages, and when we know that a school place does come available, those children do access that provision as well. So just wanted to provide that assurance around that one. The MHST, the mental health support teams, have been going for some time now, so there's already 20 that existed in Baines primary and secondary schools, and then there was an addition of more schools going into that. I believe these schools are identified using a range of demographic information, which could be related to things like free school meals access and other types of information used about those areas. I think the real positive about the MHST is having that support directly in the schools, and schools having that access to those advisors. We'd like it to be in every school, and I think that is the ambition going forward, but we're really pleased it's reached that amount of schools so far. We do a lot of work to promote the work of the MHST teams in the local area. We had two presentations so far to school standards boards from our health colleagues on the work of that, and yeah, we think it's a really positive thing that they have managed to reach another 20 schools on top of the original 20.
So at the moment, do schools identify themselves, or are you identifying schools?
Well, it's not myself, it's colleagues within health and the ICB who identify the schools, but we have staff, or schools have representation on the steering group. So there's a steering group which looks at the implementation and the pilots, and then they use the information which I believe you've prescribed for the identification of schools.
Yeah, there's parameters, sorry. Laura Ambler, Director of Place for the Integrated Care Board, so we are the strategic commissioner, if you like. So I think as Chris has described, there is a steering group and governance around how we implement the programme. There are parameters, so there will be guidance that we need to follow. Population health management, so thinking about different layers of inequality, as Chris has said, access to free school meals, etc., is generally how those schools will be identified. But if it's helpful, I can take that one back and just find out some more detail around how that initial tranche was identified. And I think your question is opportunity for rollout, really, and likelihood and funding.
You're absolutely right, Laura, because I'm governor at a school, my local school, where there's a higher than average proportion of children with special needs. And I think this mental health team would sit very well with them, but I've heard nothing about them. So I think your point is a very good one. And finally, Paul, I've got one last question for you. And again, I think it's probably going to roll into climate and emergency, but I think we're not totally meeting the needs of our young people post-16 when it comes to education provision. And in the report, it said that that there are challenges for young people in looking at the options. And looking at what's on offer locally, the report states that it provides information with a focus on employment and training. Now, when we're looking at educational opportunities, and I have a young person in my ward, and I'm sure this is reflected across many wards, is that he has been given access to an educational facility which is some way from Poulton. Now, he cannot access that, and he obviously needs help from the local authority. Apparently, we know about our homeschool transport budget is enormous. And the local authority will pay a certain amount for him to get a bus to this facility. They've now will pay a certain amount to get a taxi to get him to this educational facility. He's the type of young person with extremely complex needs. His father also has special needs. His grandmother is very much involved in trying to sort things out. But the point I'm making, that his educational provision needs to be at a certain, at Fairford House, a specialist facility. Bath College cannot meet his needs. This young person cannot tie up his shoelaces, for example. He couldn't get on a bus because he wouldn't know what to do. So what my point is what are we looking at when it comes to educational facilities for our post-16 young people with very complex special needs, when the budget doesn't seem to be there to support them to actually get to their special school, which is totally appropriate for them and where there is a place for them. So this is a really difficult situation I'm handing to you, but this is one situation that is in my ward, and I'm sure, as I said, it's there across other wards, I'm sure. I mean, the grandmother said to me, the bottom line is he goes into foster care, which, we want to avoid that. We want children to stay with their families, but if they can't get into an educational facility, it's beyond their way of doing this. So I just thought I'd open this up, because I just think it's something, as a local authority, we need to look at educational facilities and provision for our post-16 that is dependent on transport.
Can I just add a little comment into that as well? I mean, is this the sort of area that perhaps, a joined-up approach with perhaps WECA could be helping address? Because, as Liz has said, it's an issue that I'm sure affects many of us in this room, but also all councillors in this authority, I'm sure, will have had some instance where, such an example's been, shared with them.
Chair, I think it would be better if Liz sends me an email with, if you like, the confidential information involved in that particular case. I'll just pick up the general point. If you remember the last meeting, children's meeting, we had Claire Lynch come along and talk about the Youth Trailblazer. And one of the key issues around the Youth Trailblazer was to make sure that children who get an opportunity for a job or training can actually then get the transport to that. And under the circumstances, it could well be that this particular case could be referred through to Claire, because at the last meeting, we quite clearly said that would she be picking up specifically the issue around children who are in care. That, I think, was particularly an issue which I know Claire has done some work on. And if necessary, I'd be more than happy to get Claire back to give specific details around that. But the home-to-school transport rules are quite clearly set down in legislation. So I'm probably at a disadvantage to be able to answer specifically around that particular case post-16. I'm looking around the room and everybody's looking up the ceiling. So can we deal with that as specifically as a query that we'll give an answer to, and if necessary, without giving away confidential information, we can circulate that to the rest of the committee? Because I think it's a good question. I just can't give you an answer today.
Many thanks indeed. Thank you.
Perhaps Chris would come in around sort of the general principles around home-to-school transport.
I think Councillor May is right. I think the best way to deal with that is for you to provide the information, so we're not commenting on a case we don't know about on that. Just coming back to the point around post-16 and SEND provision, we've done a lot of work with Bath College, both in helping them expand and develop their offer, and invested a lot of money into Bath College as well. We developed the SEND Centre, the college in Westfield, which has proved really successful. And we have increased the offer of what we've got significantly over the years, but there's always very specific circumstances where types of needs may not be met, and as I said, we'll need to look at that one individually. We've got further ongoing discussions with Bath College about another wider offer, which it'd be too early to bring to the attention here, but we're looking at some really potentially exciting opportunities with Bath College. There is always a challenge when you get to certain parts of North East Somerset due to transport, and I think that's something that we need to look at with WECA and with our partners to say, actually, how do we make transport work in those areas for reasons around employability, people getting to work, education, or those sorts of things. That is a wider issue, which I'm not going to attempt to solve on my own. It's one that needs to work as a council, as a partner in that space as well.
Thank you, Chris. Kevin, can I put you on the end of the the list, please. Right, so Joanna?
Thank you. Just sort of picking up on some points there. First of all, on the WECA issue, I mean, education is an important part of what WECA delivers, and I certainly saw there was a press release recently about them giving transport to young people to get to work, not education, but to work. Would it be useful for this committee to actually have a WECA officer come and talk to us about the education that they're funding across this region? Because we never hear from WECA officers in this space, and that, I think, would be a very useful space to do that in. So could I ask for that?
I don't see that would be a problem.
If we could have that on the next work plan.
We'll add it on the work plan as we come to it at the end of the meeting.
Following up on the free school meals, again, thank you for the hard work, including the Labour group, on bringing this to the full council and for this piece of work going forward. It quite clearly is an ongoing issue. Because it's an ongoing issue, again, Councillor May, could you make this sort of in your report every 2 months when you come back to this committee? Because I think it isn't something that this committee should let go of, because we recognise that, yes, there's an ongoing group of people that will continually need to be brought into this, and how do we do this better? So let's not let go of it. School streets. I'm sure many of you know that the Green Group have been championing this issue for years. The data clearly shows there has been a decrease in walking and cycling to school since 2019. 49% of primary school children and 36% of secondary school children are being driven to school by car. We know that this is a public health issue. This should not just sit in the climate emergency PDS. There should be a piece of work about this being about public health, and again thinking about the ICB and the work that they do and how we ensure that young people's lives are active and promoted through the local plan and the work that's going on with that. I just think it's not useful, and I understand that you were just given in the paper at the very end to present to us. But I have repeatedly asked for this committee to have a school streets piece and for us to have a proper update, because it's a public health issue. It's not just a transport issue, and we are failing as this committee to look at that. So that's my challenge to you, Paul. I understand.
Can I just pick up on that, Joanna,
Sure.
because it was put to the chair of the climate emergency panel that this was, as you say, a cross panel issue, and I understood that there was to be a working group which you would be invited to sit on from this panel.
I have had nothing. And I also know that the other Green Group member of that PDS panel has not been invited to anything. So we know nothing and have never been invited to anything.
I will pick it up in our chairs and vice chairs meeting, okay?
Okay. The issue on the education white paper for autumn 2025, I appreciate that SEND is a massive issue, and it's really interesting to hear the very many conversations and points going forward. Clearly, this is going to have cost implications to this council, and I understand you don't know what it even looks like or what that's going to transfer to. So again, I do think that it should be something on our work plan that we put together and understand. I don't know what that looks like or how you now, our new Director of Children's Services, Jean, would like to take that forward, but I can see that that would be useful for us in the future to make sure that we are up to date on it. And I certainly know I am contacted by a huge number of parents on this issue. So there are lots of people that want to know more and how we work to resolve that better. The other issues that I had, then following up on the Alice Park, just a bit of good news. We have been given some funding now through the National Trust to support all of our children in care, I'm trying to get the right term, our looked after children, to be able to attend the event on the 21st of February where we're going to plant the tree. So we've got I applied for a certain amount of money and we won the most amount. So that's good news, and we'll hope to take that forward and bring that back to this committee. Thank you.
Chair, I'll try and answer those. WECA has not really spent a lot of time around education. Their remit was quite clearly adult education. So I think I'll take up that request and see whether we can get somebody along from WECA, because the talk around ICBs and Metro mayors having additional powers, one of those powers could well be around education and health. But there's no details nationally about how that would happen, and under those circumstances this may be a bit premature to actually get somebody along. But it is something at a corporate level we're being discussing about how WECA can be developing those types of issues. I know Claire Lynch goes along regularly to WECA meetings and works with WECA officers, it's fairly clear to me it's been a bit of a black hole with WECA, but there's new administration there, so it is something which I think the committee quite rightly could be asking that if the committee actually support you on that, Councillor Wright. With the free school meals, I think yes. I think it was an important decision, and it is right that I should be bringing back any information on a regular basis on that. Whether it's every other meeting that we come to, or perhaps a bit longer than that, that would be probably a bit more sensible, because you can then pick up any changes. On the school streets, I've just tapped Darryl on the shoulder. He's now the Mandy Bishop, and he works very closely with Sophie, and I think we'll perhaps pick that up at a corporate level, because I think it's a good challenge, but I'm not quite certain how it sits, because it seems to me as though corporately it fits several issues, and we do need to make sure that the education side of this is picked up for children. On the education white paper, the only thing I was going to add on that is that that we were expecting an inspection of our SEND provision this autumn, but the indication is that it was going to be around the white paper being issued, and under those circumstances I think the inspection that we were anticipating may well go back into the new year after the education white paper comes out. But I know that Jean and the team have been working very closely to actually prepare for having it's a joint Ofsted CQC inspection of SEND, and it is an issue that is really important for many, many children within our area. So I think one of the key things I've reported there is we're also doing a self-evaluation about our provision of SEND, and I know recently Jean has been working with other directors in the Southwest to do a peer review of our SEND preparation. So it is something that's really important for us, and we were expecting to have that inspection about now, but we've still not heard anything on that. And on Alice Park, I probably ought to just declare an interest, Chair, that I've just joined the trustees of Alice Park, because I think it provides such a major opportunity for children in the, I say that edge of Bath. I probably could describe it better than that, but I think it is a major, major opportunity for children to actually, when you go there and see the facilities, it's really quite spectacular.
Thank you, Councillor May. I have on my list, I've got Leslie on my list. I did see your hand, yes. Leslie and then Kevin.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. I've got various questions I want to ask. I'll try to do it in sections. So the first one is on the inspection of the children's services. I think it's fantastic that there's been a good result on that, and I think it would be unfortunate if we didn't mention some of those good things that are happening. So senior leaders have made notable improvements, which is incredible. That children receive timely and appropriate support. Social workers are building trusting relationships, and services helping children remain safely at home.
This is on the Cabinet Members' report, or are you talking about the...
Yeah, I'm looking at
ILACS
agenda
report?
item 8, I'm looking at the ILACS inspection.
But do you want to pick up those questions perhaps when we talk about the ILACS inspection, which I think is in either the next paper or the paper after?
I think that would be appropriate, Chair. Thank you.
So do you want to do it now or later?
Going to answer those questions later.
Okay.
Were there other questions specifically on the Cabinet Members' report? I know it's a little confusing because I know you relate to a number of
I'll do it
later reports too. Okay.
On the free school meals, again, to recognise the work that's gone in to make this happen. It's taken time to do it, and rightly so. My question is around the handfuls. Is this more than 2 and less than 5? Is it more than 5 and less than 10? In which case, to me, that would be 2 handfuls. Are we talking about such small numbers that really, I think we've had before, that quite a lot is done to encourage people to apply for the free school meals, and sometimes there's not much more you can do. And the research shows they don't really know why people don't want to apply. But if we look at the 139 people, that represents approximately over £200,000 that's coming into those schools, which is really important. And I say approximately because I don't know whether that's all primary, some secondary, whether it's some children looked after. So it would be good to see, and I don't see how we're going to note this in a couple of months or even 4 months. It would be good to see longer term what impact that is having in relation to health and well-being, and also school exclusions, because we know that people having free school meals are more likely to be in those categories as well. So another thing I wanted to mention was on the virtual school for children in care. So the last line, almost on the last paragraph, is around no child in a protection plan was excluded from school, which again I think is a fantastic achievement, and we shouldn't let that go by. I'll leave that for now, but I'd like to come back to the families first as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm conscious, I know, Chris, you've already made a promise that you'll bring back more information about free school meals and the impact and, you know, additional knowledge that you will be gathering on that. So you might want to address some of Leslie's points on that one now, but, you know, obviously we would expect more information, I guess. Would it be ready by December, or is that too soon, do you think?
So we've already made a commitment to find out a bit more about the handful, and whether it's a handful or 2 handfuls. So we'll get that on the wards they go to. And I will need to speak to the welfare team about what additional information they hold about the age in primaries and secondaries and things like that. And then I'd probably need to give a little bit more thought about how we demonstrate impact, because it becomes quite a granular exercise, and I don't want to commit a welfare team to that just yet. But let me come back with the request around where are these young people and what have we achieved, because I think that's a really important question.
Paul, did you want to add anything, or you?
Yes, within the virtual school, I just wanted to register, and I'm sure your Vice Chair will agree with me, that the scrutiny of the virtual school, I've seen it transformed, I think, over a period of time. And I think it's really something that we can be quite proud of now. When I reread my report, I said that we've now got some good people in the team. And that then, if you like, decries how good the existing people are in the team. So I didn't mean that to be rude, but I know Sarah has built up a really good team. And the statistics that are provided to the virtual school board are really quite stunning, and down to the individual child. And I think that's really the change that has taken place, is that commitment to the children, but also to make sure that the organisations that the children are in are actually getting the support that they need to be able to do that job effectively. So I'm sorry if I've taken that in a slightly different direction, but I think it is important that we recognise that the virtual school is in my opinion, and I hope Liz would agree, is working exceedingly well at the moment with the quality of people and the work that they're doing and the commitment they've got for young people is absolutely stunning. I don't think I answered Councillor Mansell's question, but but I do think it's important that we actually do recognise that progress has been made.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anything I've missed, Chair?
I don't think so. Leslie, I wasn't sure. Did you have another question that you were going to ask? You sort of left it like you were about to ask another question.
I would like to ask on the Families First partnership reforms as well. So again, this is another initiative for the department to manage. I wanted to ask what resources and training are needed to support the new practitioner roles. What mechanisms are in place to escalate concerns across agencies and safeguarding? And how are we going to tailor these reforms to meet local needs? And are there any pilot programmes or any feedback from families and practitioners? And what role will the scrutiny committee play in monitoring the implementation?
Can I pick up the last question? So you're aware that there is a task group that's looking at this specific sort of piece of work around early help. And so we've been kind of, as I said, you know, working sort of parallel to that piece of work being implemented. I'm very happy, Leslie, if you want to join that group as well, because perhaps some of your more specific questions might get answered through that forum. Yeah, sure. Would you, is there more you wanted to add, Phoebe, maybe?
So the changes are, some of them will require training for our staff. So, for example, one of the 4 key areas that we're developing as part of the reforms is thinking about family group decision making. And we have a really good team who undertake family group conferences. It's a well-established method of supporting families to identify how they can support children in their network, either in the community or indeed by offering alternative care if that's what becomes necessary. What we're wanting to do is develop family network meetings and family group decisions methods right across our service. So it's not just a team doing it. Actually, all of our practitioners and managers are trained in an approach that supports early family decision making. So there is a training need there, but we would use our existing training mechanisms in order to undertake that, and our experts, who are our family group conference service, to do that training. We are in the middle of looking at how we, and I used this term earlier, realign our service to make sure that we can meet the challenges of Family First. We're learning a lot from the pathfinders up and down the country who were given funding by central government in order to look at how they might pilot some of the Family First reforms. Dorset is the southwest local authority, but there are others up and down the country that are smaller authorities that actually might have some more synergy with some of the ways in which we deliver services in Baines. I think, as I said, we're well positioned to make some of the changes required. One of them includes multi-agency child protection teams, so really how we develop and strengthen decision-making at the point at which children do live with significant risk, to make sure that we've learnt from national panel reviews in relation to making decisions at an appropriate timescale, protecting children where we need to, and being really thoughtful about that every single time. Well, you've already heard in terms of our ILACS inspection, we do that quite well. already, but this is an opportunity to think with multi-agency partners about how we do that even better. So thinking about developing a specialist multi-agent team that can reach into all of our social work teams and support that decision making, and to make sure there's consistency and appropriateness in relation to that. So it will simply strengthen what we already do in our view. I think the most challenging part of the reforms for us will be supporting families at an earlier stage in terms of realigning our workers, qualified and differently qualified, so not just qualified social workers, but family support workers or practitioners, to support children at a much earlier stage and make sure that there isn't a change to those practitioners as need increases, so that we're offering consistency, we're not changing professionals where we don't need to, and we're making sure that others join those practitioners to support families in the best way we can. That will need training and support for those practitioners for whom that's going to be a different way or a developed way of working. And we're in the middle of making sense of what that's likely to mean in terms of costs, in terms of additional costs. But we will get ongoing funding that will be very much targeted towards the family first reforms. And our first challenge, of course, is how do we make that work for what we need to do. So I think that's all I'll say at this stage. Happy to, as I say, come back and talk more about that, or to the task and finish group.
Yeah, I think it might be quite useful to have that come to the task and finish group, as obviously we're exploring it in more depth at that in that group. And as I said, the invitation, Leslie, is extended for you.
Thank you for that, Jean. That's reassuring. Can I ask just one more question? I was looking on the website at the equality impact assessments, and there's one, it says Charlton House, but when you look at it, it's education and safeguarding. So this is about a new special school offering 30-day placements for young people with an EHCP. It's dated the 7th of October, so it's only last week. But I can't see anything on the agenda around it. Do you have any more information on that, Paul?
Yes, the original proposals around Charlton House, because we couldn't find a supplier, is that the right word, a provider, to provide the range of services that we wanted, which was around educational services. So we then had to go back into the drawing board to look at how we can actually organise this, and it's then going to be now both social care and education, because there is an overlap with many children for their needs, and we're at the stage now where we can now start to communicate more effectively with local councillors, because last time when we were talking about Charlton House, we had a briefing for the town council and local councillors because of the impact of the nature of the provision that was going to be made there. So now we're now just starting doing that again, but around social and education on the site. And I think it's an important move, because I've been talking to Jean about how we can get more local provision around social care, and that's something that we'll be coming back with a full report as soon as we can. That's really just up to date. I didn't think there was enough information for me to actually give a full report today in my report, because of the timescales of doing reports in terms of getting it out to the committee. But I'll certainly be bringing back a report to the next meeting, Chair.
Thank you for that commitment, Paul. And yes, I think so. That report, I think we would expect in December, wouldn't we? Yes. Okay. Thank you, Kevin. I'm conscious this item's gone on slightly longer than I expected. So.
Sorry. Thank you, Chair. It's really just to push one of the initial points I made a little bit more, and Jean started touching on it then around some additional funding, what it might be used for. But when we had the last sort of discussion around, sorry, that I was party to, around First Families, there was definitely this idea that the sufficiency of the 4,500, whatever it was not enough. So my one question in three was additional money actually applied for? What was it actually going to cover? And if you didn't get it, how is it being prioritised, please?
And if you don't know the answer fully, then it can also come to our task group.
I mean, it's a...
Although Chris might know the answer.
I'll answer the political question, because I think there's politics behind that. I know that Jean mentioned about Dorset. They had something like £2 million, I think, given to them when they were doing the Pathfinder, and we're talking about something like 400,000 coming to us. And under those circumstances, that was something that we were quite worried about. But the whole funding issues have not yet been made completely clear. I think the principles behind this about multi-agency frontline working are absolutely crucial. And under those circumstances, I didn't really want to get into the politics of whether we've got enough funding to do it or not, because we always have to deal with the funding that we're given. I think what is being positive about it, around fair funding, where they're talking about local authorities getting funding for everything in one pot, this is going to be separate funding that's coming through. And under those circumstances, where we become threatened by everything going into a corporate pot, this particular initiative is going to, we've been told, going to be separately funded by the government. And it may not be enough, but we will work within the resources that we're given. And if there's any pressure that you can bring, Kevin, to make sure that our funding is increased, the government is under intense pressure around funding, and under those circumstances, we'll just do the best that we can with the funding that we've given. I'm sorry, that's a political answer, but I did think it was a bit of a political question.
No, it was genuinely not a political question, in the sense that I'm generally interested in what you've identified needs to be funded, and has that been funded? Because I think it's important at a panel like this that we are able to share where we're at with those key things.
A fair question, fair question. I've got Jean sat next door to me. We'll try and pick that up at the next meeting, if that's all right, Jean. And
I suspect we will have our targeted meeting before that, so perhaps we could have sort of like a preempt of what you might report in December to this panel. Thank you. Okay. Chris, was there anything else you wanted to add, or has everybody covered?
I think most of it's covered, and they'll come back and manage those questions through the panel and the information we bring back to them.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm now moving on to the next item, just double checking I've not missed anybody, I don't think I have. And this is, I'm going to invite Laura Ambler from the BSW ICB to give us any further information in addition to the report that's been circulated. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, I'm Laura Ambler, Director of Place for Baines, Swindon and Wiltshire Integrated Care Board, and I'm joined by my colleague Uzo from the RUH. Uzo is Director of Pharmacy, and the third update on my report. If there are any questions, we'll try and answer those together. So very briefly, Chair, we'll accept the report as read, as we always do. There are three very brief updates. The first one, as promised, is to give you an update on the changes in the NHS, so in particular around the new cluster. So a reminder that Baines, Swindon and Wiltshire are clustering with Dorset and Somerset. I'm now really pleased to be able to share with you that we have a new Chief Executive Officer that's been appointed to be the Chief Executive across that whole cluster. So that's Jonathan Higman, and you'll see that in the update. The other update on potential changes is a personal update around myself, Chair, and I have written to yourself and also the lead members, just to let you know, my personal circumstances have changed and I will be leaving the ICB at the end of the year. So there is plenty of time. We have 3 months for interim arrangements and transition. So obviously I'm with you today and I will be with you at your next 2 meetings if you will have me. And we will keep you updated as we go forward on that. If I may, winter vaccinations, a brief update there, really around the eligibility of groups. I think that was a question that we had from the panel last time. So we have referenced that in the report. And also, Councillor Wright, in response to your query around could we have an update on the programme overall and the data, you'll see that we don't have a breakdown of data, obviously, for this year because it's not available. But what we have given you is a summary of what we had from previous seasons. So any views on that welcome and if that format is helpful. And so finally, as I said, Chair, we have an update from the RUH as well. Just to be clear, Chair, I know that there were a number of questions that we asked of the RUH. For today, what we're covering off is the closure of the outpatients medicine courier service. At a future meeting we've got on your forward plan also, I think you were asking broader questions around things like the league table. So that's not one for today, Chair, but we will have another colleague that will come and join us on that. And again, if I may, Chair, just to direct in that bit of the report, the key things to draw out are around the rationale for change, the new model. Obviously, there's a bit on implications, assurance that an EQIA has been done, and clarity on next steps. So perhaps if I pause there, Chair, and then if there's anything that my colleague Uzo wanted to add, or we could go straight to questions as you see fit, Chair.
Thank you. I don't know if the colleague from the IOH wants to add anything to what you've just said. And perhaps you could also give us your name, please. Thank you.
Thank you. So nothing to add to the report, taking it as read. My name is Uzo Ibechku. I'm Director of Pharmacy and Chief Pharmacist to the RUH. Happy to take any questions about it.
Thank you. Thank you both. And before I go on any further, just congratulations on your new role. But we absolutely invite and expect you to attend our meetings up until the moment you leave. Okay? Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chair.
Right. Any questions from the panel? Kevin?
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple. And the first one, and it may have been the way I read it, so forgive me if I've got definitely the wrong end of the stick on this one, around the new pharmacy service, and if you like, the closure of one thing and opening the other. It appeared to say that patients had been informed and there was a patient support contact for people to contact. And I just wondered whether the patients this had been discussed with them before the closure decision had come about, and if it had, what sort of barriers had been discovered that maybe need support with. And the second question was just around the vaccinations and whether there was any particular target figures that you had on those vaccinations, whether it's due to herd immunity or whether it's due to other things that you think actually we've achieved this, and Baines looks like it's doing quite well on most of the things, but we would like to actually be here on all those. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Happy to take the engagement now. So, in answer to that, the direct patient engagement hasn't happened as planned yet. The work has been done with the patient experience team within RUH and then with the comms and the community engagement team within the ICB. The feeling and joint approach being that we bring it here first, take any initial questions before the official comms go out there. So we have done a fair bit of work with the teams, with the specialty teams affected, to take their views on how best to approach it. But the feeling was very much that if we could bring it here first and take any additional questions, then we proceed with official patient comms.
Yeah. So, if I may add to that. So the ask of the committee really is whether you have any additional views in how we might make sure that we have patient quality and service as we move forward, given everything that you've seen in the paper. So as Uzo has said, through the patient quality team in the RUH, clearly service user input from what they know has helped us with the proposal. All patients will be written to, so there is a letter that is drafted. It's not included in your papers, but we can share a copy offline. We didn't think it was appropriate to put that into a public paper pack, obviously before people had been written to. So we do have that letter drafted, and clearly the ICB and the RUH have been working very closely together as comms specialists to think about how best to communicate that change, but we need to bring it here just to see if there are any other views that you might have.
Well, as I say, my initial reading in my head, I was thinking, well, with the relatively small number, although I know that that probably isn't a relatively small number, but it might be compared with the numbers you deal with, that actually some sort of personal contact via the patient contact people and actually discussing with them what their needs are and why they may actually have to have this service before receiving a letter that says this service is now closed. And if you have a problem, then contact, because it just seems that if I was somebody in a situation where I relied heavily, for whatever reason it may be, on my medicine coming to my front door, and then had a letter in my hand saying it's now stopped, I would initially panic whether there's a patient contact there or otherwise, because there must have been a good reason. I mean, there's always going to be exceptions, and there's always going to be things, whether it's for send or anything else, where the system has changed and the people's circumstances have changed, and that might be perfectly acceptable to them. But on other things, if they're in the middle of an area like Chew Valley or somewhere else, which is very hard to get to a pharmacy, or other things may be causing an issue, I would much prefer to talk to a human being and say, these are my needs and this is why I need it here, as opposed to, sorry, here's a letter in my hand saying I haven't got it.
Yeah, I think we can take that under consideration, and I know, Uzo, you might want to come on to it, that there is a volunteer service as well for those case-by-case exceptional basis.
Yes, absolutely, and that is all fair feedback and has been discussed internally in terms of if you like, the actions from this point to that. So, almost exclusively, the use of these services was with one specialty, and we are working with them very intensively between now and the decommission date to get all of those things done.
On that point, so can I just check, have Healthwatch been asked for their views?
I'm not sure that they have, but we can make sure that that happens. We have a locality team, so that would be Sue Poole from Healthwatch. We can certainly share that with her. Thank you for the suggestion, Chair.
I interrupted you. You were about to say something else.
I was going to say something around vaccinations, Chair, which I think was the second question. So again, in terms of target figures, it's not really about trying to drive herd immunity, and we don't have a target figure per se. But obviously what we are trying to do is make sure that we hit the national target, which we are now exceeding. And I think our figures generally have always been pretty good, I think, across the South-West. We're always quite a front runner. So I think the aim is just to continue with that.
Okay. So, thank you. I think that was all your questions, wasn't it, Kevin? Yes. Lovely. Barrett.
Chair, if I may ask a series of questions on vaccines, just to make it easy to follow. I really would like to know the numbers for your seasonal influenza uptake. I don't want to know it's good enough. I really want to know what is it. And I think you should be able to tell us what it will be, or what targets you have. I really want to know. The second point I want to make about seasonal influenza is, even if we are good with our uptake, we need to be good stroke excellent. And my reasons are that it saves lives, but also it reduces winter pressures on the NHS. And it's about this time that the winter pressures all start. And therefore, we really need to be striving towards as good a uptake as is possible, with all hands to the pump handle. On the same line, I would like to have an idea, because I don't have that idea, that picture of, is the uptake for seasonal influenza at the same level as the uptake for COVID-19 vaccine? The reason why I'm asking is there is a lot of misinformation around COVID vaccines, and I would be interested to know if there is a fall-off with respect to uptake of COVID vaccines, because both illnesses are there and both of them cause pressure on NHS services. I'll wait for you to answer those, and then I've got one more question.
Yeah, thank you for those questions. And apologies, I didn't mean to sound flippant or for it to come out as flippant in terms of, in a way, obviously we are trying to meet national targets, but what I'm trying to say is we don't just stop there. To your point, we keep going. It's not that you reach a target and then you just stop. You keep going to get that maximum uptake as possible for all the reasons that you've set out. So I think it's fair to say that we have had a pioneering vaccination team in BSW. We've been very fortunate that we had that during the COVID pandemic, and we've now rolled that out into our BAU. And I think that is why we generally see a higher uptake through our vaccination programmes. The question specifically, the comparison between is the flu uptake the same as COVID-19 or vice versa rather, I'll need to take back to our vaccination team and just check. I don't know what that differential is. And again, just to reiterate, obviously we won't have those figures for this year yet. What you've got in your packs is for previous seasons, so you can see general trend analysis. But I'll certainly see if there's anything that the VAX team can tell us about that.
So really, I'd be grateful if you'd come back next time. Give us some percentage uptake numbers, please, because we need to know. And if we know, and we should know in real time, there are many tools available for us to know in real time what our vaccine uptake is. Because if in real time, in November, you know that your vaccine uptake is not as good as previous trends, and we have the software, we have the technology, we have the know-how, then we can say we need to mobilize this, otherwise we will have pressures on the NHS. So I think we need to have that, which is where is it going, and do we need to now press those triggers to say we need to increase our uptake because appointments are not available at GP practices or whatever the cause is for that poor uptake. If I may, I have another line of question on another vaccine, which is, I don't know if this is your remit or not, but I will ask, and you can say not my remit. With the introduction of the MMRV vaccine, the shingles vaccines are interrelated, okay? So because we are now going to be, for people here, we normally immunize with measles, mumps, rubella. We are now going to immunize with measles, mumps, rubella plus chickenpox. That's the V. These are childhood vaccines. So as a result of introducing chickenpox vaccine, we will see less chickenpox in the community. Further to seeing less chickenpox in the community, it is more imperative that the older age group are protected by the shingles vaccine, because otherwise you will have the older age group having more shingles because they are not encountering the chickenpox from their grandchildren. You follow? So what I want to know is, do we have systems, processes, data in place to monitor both? Meaning, we know that we have that uptake rates for MMRV, okay? But we also want to know that our shingles vaccines uptake is maintained at a high level. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know the answer to that question, so I will need to take that back to the vaccinations team, and I'll make sure that we frame it appropriately and check that we're asking the exact exam question with you before we ask them that. But yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Onkar.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I've got a few questions. So to start with, on the leadership. With the new ICB cluster structure covering such a large geographical area, so what mechanisms are in place to ensure Baines retain a strong local voice in decision making and resource allocation?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Councillor. And as you know, as we've spoken about before, the organisational change that will follow now is not yet set out. So I think at the moment, what we currently have, so there is a place director, for example, in each of the local authority areas, one for Baines, one for Swindon, one for Wiltshire. What we need to work through as we form as the cluster is what that place representation is going to look like. What I can provide is the assurance that certainly the new Chief Executive, as they have come in, and indeed the new Chair, and indeed the ongoing conversations between the local authorities and the ICB, has recognised the importance of place. So that is fully understood. It is well understood. So at the moment, there are current governance arrangements that are in place. And what we'll need to do is to make sure that we are clear on what those arrangements will be moving forward. So to give you an example of that, at the moment, your Chief Executive is a partner member of the ICB board, for example. So there'll be local authority representation moving forward in different parts of governance. When we work on certain programmes, we work really closely with senior officers. So we work very closely, for example, with Jean and Darryl and indeed with Suzanne Westhead on some of those things that we've jointly commissioned together. And of course, the other key role, I guess, where we need to make sure there is an interface is with your Health and Wellbeing Board as well. And obviously that's chaired by Councillor May. So we'll make sure that when we look at those transition arrangements moving forward, that we give some clarity on those three things, but I'm sure there'll be many others as well. In terms of funding and budgets, so at the moment, the only joint pooled arrangements that we have is something called the Better Care Fund. And again, that comes down nationally from government and is allocated in part to local authorities and in part to the ICB. And we have chosen to pool those funds using something called a Section 75 arrangement, and we report that through the Health and Wellbeing Board, and we do quarterly update reports on that. And this committee is copied into those papers. So you'll have visibility of that as we continue to move forward. To put it another way, if any of those arrangements were to change, obviously you would be notified and would be have a view sought around that.
Thank you. And on vaccination program, well, partially related to Councillor Pankania's question about the uptake, but what contingency plans are in place if vaccination uptakes in Baines drop below current levels later in winter season?
Yeah, so I think we do keep a proactive watch on this, and we have got our vaccination team that are able to identify when we think that we are not meeting the uptake that we would expect to see at a certain point. So I know that we need to bring that specific data back. What I might do, if I may, is ask a member of the vaccination team either to provide that information offline, or if you think it would be helpful for them to be here to answer questions more specifically, we can arrange for that.
I think the way that the questioning is going now, I suspect that actually having somebody from the vaccination team would be really useful. Thank you, Lord, for the offer. Yes.
Thank you. And my last question about the RUH medicine courier service closure. So how will the ICB and RUH monitor unintended consequences of ending the courier service? And the question really is, what threshold would trigger a review of the decision?
Again, Thank you for that. Thank you for the question. So, in terms of monitoring unintended consequences, like the key areas that have been flagged to date have been how we work with community pharmacy, for instance, community pharmacy workload, and patient complaints. So, in terms of that element, we very, very closely monitor the activity through this, any medication incidents or complaints around access to medicines and anything that might come in through our advice line. I think in terms of, if you like, impact from a workload point of view, just to put some numbers out there. So, community pharmacies in Baines process roughly 2 to 3 million items across the 40-odd pharmacies per year. This, as things currently stand, for phase one would introduce about 5,000 items, so a very, very small percentage in there. And so we're taking it in a very, very phased manner to actually get to where we want to, because this first step is very much how do we develop services that are more aligned to the 10-year plan, improving access to care overall. So we're quite confident that the overall result of what we're doing here will actually improve care for more patients that are being affected by the closure of the courier service, but we are taking it in a very staged manner. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Now, on my list, I've got Leslie, then David, and then Liz, I think. Leslie first.
Thank you, and thank you for the report. And congratulations on your new role, Laura. I'm sure you'll be successful in that. I wanted to ask questions about the data provided on the vaccinations. So it says on our page 35, the presentation doesn't have any numbers on it, that the BSW trusts had the highest staff flu uptake nationally at 56%, which is, if everybody knows, just over 50%. So what is being done to increase that? It's great that it's higher than anybody else. It's a bit worrying that it may be very much lower everywhere else. And then on the page 37, access and inequality provider, it talks in the bottom green square about inequalities clinics. So can you explain what that means and how this works? And then I'll come back on the new process in a minute to yourself. Izoma.
Thank you. So on the what is being done to increase staff uptake, and you're right, it comes back to that point, doesn't it, is that you can be the highest uptake in the Southwest, but it doesn't mean that you rest on that. There are direct comms campaigns, so we do that across all channels, making sure that there's ease of access, making sure that the vaccination is available free, all of those sorts of things are what we try and do to get that staff uptake. But I can ask the vaccination team if they want to provide a fuller answer on that. And then, yeah, I am just looking at the inequalities clinics that you refer on the page 37, and this is around the provider network, so how the vaccination programme is rolled out. I must confess, Councillor, I don't have any qualification on what that entails, so again, I will go and ask that question specifically of the vaccination team.
Perhaps, again, that could form part of the sort of expected contribution to this meeting, I guess, in the November meeting, if that was possible?
Yeah, absolutely. Essentially, I think as we all know, we target certain cohorts of our population, in particular, for example, if there are areas of deprivation, or if there are particular cohorts that are more vulnerable, or cohorts that typically find it difficult to access, so things like our gypsy traveller and boater community. So I think it's referring to that, but I would just like to check that information and come back.
Thank you, Laura. Were there any more questions, Leslie?
Thank you for that, Laura. And just coming to the closure of the outpatients medicine courier service, so you said there was discussions with the PALS team. were there any discussions with patients, and how does this fit with the 10-year NHS plan to ensure that patients have more involvement in co-design and co-development of services? And around the new model, and I know this is again a big thing within the NHS 10-year plan about everything being digital and electronic, what happens if you have no internet access? Because that happens not just in some of our rural areas, but in parts of that as well. And you've also talked about the equality considerations. Can we have a look at the equality impact assessment? Thank you.
Yeah, I'll make a start, and then Uzo can add any comments. So I think, as we said, when we talk about engaging with the patients, in this example, what we're talking about here is a service that, if you like, by definition, there's a lot of variation. So this is something that came out of COVID. It was not offered equally to everybody. And clearly, as we look at this and as we review, you'll see this in the rationale for the change. It didn't offer an equivalent and an equitable level of service for everybody. And actually, there were some issues with the service itself in terms of the fragmentation and the different sources. And so, therefore, when we reviewed this, and as Uzo has said, speaking with patient quality team, the sense was that it would make far more sense not to be offering this service, but indeed to be doing, as we are in other areas, putting this more in terms of patient choice of where they can pick up their prescriptions. So this affects, I think, as Uzo was saying, one speciality in particular, and about 1%, I think, of the 5,000 prescriptions that go through the RUH. So hopefully that just gives you a little bit of context, which I hope is helpful. So in terms of how we then engage with patients, obviously, as we've already said, we would be taking up the suggestions from this committee that we work with those that have that direct interface with service users or patients. And also we would be writing to everybody directly. There is a helpline attached to that. And indeed, as we've said, there is a volunteer service which could look at things on a case-by-case basis. To your point, Councillor, if there weren't internet access, for example, if there were other considerations that we needed to give. So I hope that helps answer a bit of those questions. Is there anything you wanted to add, Uzo, and in particular the EQIA, whether we could make that available?
So yes, and thank you, Laura, for the question. So yes, in terms of the EQIA, we will be able to make that available. I think a point just to raise on the EQIA is that in terms of those groups that have been flagged at impact, the transition to the new model will support those same groups in larger numbers across a larger number of specialties. And so again, on balance, it was felt that moving from a service that very intensely supported just 1% of patients towards one where we could support all specialties was the best use of funds.
Thank you. Thank you for the answers too. So going back to my list, I've got David and then Liz.
Thank you, Chair. Laura, going on to ICB funding and reorganisation and everything else, really. As you will be acutely aware more than anybody, NHS England has asked the ICBs to reduce their running costs by 50% by the end of December, I think it was. And that's supposed to be managed through redundancies. But they didn't fund the redundancies. So that left a £1 billion shortfall across NHS England. So how are you going to fund it? What's the funding gap? Have you paused the redundancies? Is there going to be a knock-on to frontline services?
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, they're all pertinent questions, which I think it's fair to say we don't have all of the answers to at the moment. And as we've said, we've always been open and transparent. As soon as we do have information, we will share that with you. So you're quite right. If you remember, I think it was back in March, NHSE there was an announcement rather that NHSE would be merging with Department of Health and Social Care, and then linked with that, that ICBs needed to reduce their running costs by 50%, and that was by the end of Q3, so you're right, by the end of December. Subsequently, I think it is fair to say that it has been, I think in elements of the press, reported that those costs of change for that whole process appear to not have an identified funding source. So I think where we are from an ICB perspective, in Bain, Swindon and Wiltshire, we have obviously committed to doing that senior level review. So that has included having a single chair, a single chief executive officer, and the executive structure is what will be looked at next. Anything beyond that in terms of organisational change, there isn't any update on at the moment, but as soon as there is, obviously we'll make sure that the committee are aware. But I think it is fair to say that it is certainly very challenging, and certainly without those costs, those timescales would be incredibly challenging to meet.
Liz, you're next to my list.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Congratulations again, Laura, and I'm glad I have you now to answer this question, because this comes from the last meeting, and it's looking at the transfer for adult services from to HCRG, and it was autism and ADHD. And mainly you focused on ADHD last time, where we looked at self-identification and access to medication. But we didn't mention, and I would like you, if you can today, perhaps next time round, to talk about the drop-off in provision for people with autism, especially as we know it's on the increase, and the loss of the advice service that was once provided. So if you could talk about that now, and whether HCRG is going to continue with these, improve them, or not. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to cover some of that now, and I think we should bring back a fuller update report. The panel will remember when we commissioned, and obviously we did that jointly, local authorities and the ICB, so across 3 local authorities and 2 ICBs, we commissioned the Integrated Community-Based Care Programme. Now, one of the key things that we were looking at was how we might look at pathways in a different way, and how we might make sure that we had integrated seamless care. So autism was part of that. So previously that was delivered in different ways by different providers. And so the idea was that we would strategically commission, and as we know, HCRG have been awarded that commission, and we would have an end-to-end pathway for those with autism to help them live well in the community, and that means access to a range of different support. We are also, as I think we reported last time, securing and building a new inpatient facility for those with autism who may need additional help with their mental health, and it requires an inpatient stay because it's not able to be met within an acute hospital with reasonable adjustments. So again, that community wraparound to that unit is going to be really important. That new unit will open next year. And a sister unit, the Brook, has just opened in Dawlish this year. And as an ICB, we are the lead commissioner on both of those units for something called the regional front door, so how people might be able to access that support. So the transfer of services to HCRG from AWP for some of those autism services, as we know, that took place. We've had the 100-day safe landing of services. What we're looking at now is how we think about transformation of those services, and we're doing that in consultation with service users and those with lived voice. So prior to the ICB and doing that commissioning, we actually did, around autism and ADHD, we did have a number of groups that we engaged with around their experiences and what might be helpful, and indeed we had that when we looked at the new unit as well, and that informs something called our commissioning intentions. So what was it that we were looking to commission, and what particular outcomes did we want from the services that we are commissioning? So what I would say that's really important is that we are now looking at an outcomes-based service provision. So what that means is that, you know, we are focusing on the needs, so it's needs-led. What's the needs of the individual and how do we meet those needs? So as part of that, I know that there was a service, which I think you might be referring to, Councillor Hardman, that AWP had, which was like a support group, again, for a very small cohort of people. Notwithstanding that, if you're one of those people, it's really important to you, and I think we recognise that. So we did write to that service, as we did with any service that we were decommissioning ahead of the ICBC, and we have arrangements in place with other BCSE providers and indeed with HCRG themselves to offer other support instead that is broader and more accessible and is part of that end-to-end pathway of the whole of how we are dealing with autism. So I think we understand that obviously, you know, for some of those individuals that was a disappointment, I think it's fair to say, but we have tried to work with them and indeed we've been in direct communication, I think, with some of the users of that. Again, just to offer that personal support and somebody who they can talk to directly to think about where else they might be able to access support. So I think there is a good news story to say around that autism transformation, and if the panel would like it, we'd like to come and bring an update. I think that would be really sensible.
Thank you very much, and I think that would be very sensible, but could I just challenge you on these autistic clinics? They're very small, aren't they? Is this the one that's been set up in Bristol with catering for our whole region and with a very small number of beds? Just to clarify that for me, please.
Yeah, sorry. So the inpatient unit, yeah, that has 10 beds that have been commissioned. So that was profiled across the southwest to understand how many we might need. Clearly, what we're trying to move to is that nobody needs an inpatient stay because clearly previous models of delivery would have been that once people entered a unit that was an inpatient stay, they may stay there for a very long length of stay, and we knew that that often wasn't ideal for people. They might be further away from family, etc., etc. So the new model is around having shorter therapeutic interventions, and so shorter lengths of stay, but it's really around focusing on that community wraparound support. So of those 10 beds, we have currently commissioned 9, but as I say, we are working in conjunction with other ICBs who would be able to spot purchase beds against their profile. The key thing is that whoever accesses that unit, it will be based on their needs, and that's why that regional front door is really important. So that's the 10-bedded unit. The reason that it's in Bristol and not within the BSW footprint, for example, is because when the funding was announced, and it was £20.5 million worth of funding, which I think we all appreciate nationally is obviously quite unheard of in these times, there were certain parameters that came with it, and it needed to be able to be co-located. So that meant that there were only a certain number of suitable sites that were available. So this site is in Bristol, and hence the one, so that covers the north of the region, if you like. The one that covers the south of the region is in Dawlish and is called the Brook. The one in the north of the region, so our one, if you like, is called the Kingfisher. And again, that name was generated and agreed by a service user community. And indeed, the design of the unit and all of the artwork that's going to be in the unit, again, has been influenced by those with Live Voice.
Thank you. That's really comprehensive. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Yes, so I'm just going to ask a couple of questions. So one is one that I've referred to, I think, pretty much as soon as we knew that the ICBs were going to be reclustered. Perhaps that's the verb. But are you more or less certain that the cluster will be as you've been working towards, i.e. with Dorset and BCP? I'm still hearing noises around the cluster being in the other direction, and if it is in the other direction, how swiftly can alternative arrangements be being made, or, you know, I mean, or is all the work now going in the direction that you have assumed?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's a big question. I'm not sure if it's all for me to answer, but I think from an integrated care board perspective, if I may, and from an NHS perspective, the clusters were agreed. They had to be agreed regionally and then nationally, and as we know, have Secretary of State sign-off. So as far as the ICBs are concerned, yes, those clustering arrangements remain, and they will be the ones that will be worked on now moving forward. I think, as we've mentioned here previously, I recognise that for some there was a desire or an intention to maybe explore, could that cluster be, say, with BNSSG or with other ICBs? And I think I've laid out the reasons previously that from a health perspective, those patient flows, the strength was in the BSW cluster, the BSW ICB remaining intact, if you like, and clustering with Dorset and Somerset. To move forward, my understanding and the understanding that we have is that there will need to be formal merger arrangements in due course, and of course I don't know what that might look like, and I'm not sure that I'm well placed to be able to say whether or not that means that the cluster as it currently exists would go through those formal merger arrangements or not. But certainly all the work that we're doing today is around, from a health perspective, is around that cluster, Dorset, Somerset and BSW.
So Somerset, not BCP?
So Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole is part of Dorset. So Dorset has 2 local authorities. So there will be 6 local authorities, if you like, in total across the cluster. So we have Bain, Swindon and Wiltshire from our ICB. We have Dorset, and we have Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole from the Dorset ICB, and then Somerset, local authority from the Somerset ICB. So 6 local authorities in total.
And then, just picking up on a point that Onkar was making earlier, should we expect that we would still have a presence at these meetings from a person representing our location within whatever that cluster is?
Again, a difficult one maybe for me to answer. My personal view is that, yes, I think that would be a reasonable expectation and request that should be made, and certainly in my time here I intend to make sure that that is the transition arrangement that we leave you with.
That's reassuring, so you're not going to be saying anything negative about your experience here. That's good to hear. And then finally, my question is around vaccinations, and I think maybe this is a question that will come up with the sort of more specific report on vaccinations, because I think there must be a concern that the increased number of people who are being asked to pay for vaccinations must have an impact on the numbers that are then taking up the vaccination offer. And then, you know, how is that reflected in the numbers of cases? And that will go for flu, that will go for COVID, I'm sure, and, you know, other vaccinations.
Yeah, I understand the point, and again, in terms of the eligibility for COVID, for example, that is now 75 in those that are immunosuppressed. So, yeah, let me take that back to the vaccination team and ask them if we can see that coming through in the trend data.
Thank you very much, Laura. Okay, I'm now going to move on to the next item, which is the Ofsted inspection report. So I believe, Councillor May, you're going to introduce this item?
Very briefly, Chair, because I'm aware that time's going on. I think really just to pick up the fact that this was an inspection of the whole children's services. We've had a number of inspections, specialist inspections that have taken place, which have all been really positive. But this was just for the whole department. And I recorded earlier on that the situation in the future will probably change in terms of ILAC's inspections, but I'm going to hand over at this point to Jean just to introduce the item in a little bit more detail.
Thank you. I think we're going to put up a very short slide pack. But before I say anything, just want to introduce 2 colleagues who are going to just say a few things, take us through a very few short slides. Phoebe, do you want to introduce yourself? You need to pick
Apologies.
Sorry, I don't think we were expecting the slides, so...
I think they are. I've joined the meeting. If you could please share the screen.
Okay, is it absolutely necessary to have them?
I think it's just a bit of background context.
All right,
They're
okay.
only 6 slides, just as while we're talking, if that's okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
It's only because obviously our monitor here is at a much lower level, that's why I was... And just while I've got your attention with that background noise, can you all make sure that you speak really clearly into the microphones? Because obviously there's a lot of stuff going on outside of this room that I think is impact on people's ability to hear as well.
Okay.
If I'd realised about the slides, I would have made sure this monitor was back up again. If everyone could just move so you can see the slides. And then do you want to start?
Yes. So I'm Phoebe Holland. I'm the Interim Assistant Director of Children's Services.
Misty Grove, Service Development Manager for Children's Social Care.
So just a few short slides just to take you through a summary of the overall judgments and to highlight some strengths and where we have got some work to do in terms of developments. Just in terms of background context, we have been inspected last in 2022 when there was a good judgment across all judged areas at that time. And since then, as per the framework for inspection of children's services, we've had a focused visit between that inspection and this that focused on care leavers. And that was in late 2024. So the inspection, the short inspection that happened in June this year, was really on the back of all of that activity. We, as I say, we received those 5 good judgments, if we could move on. So the 4 key judgments, there's 5 areas. There's 1 is an overall judgment, and there are then 4 key areas that the inspectors look at. The progress and experience of care leavers is actually a new separate judgment. It used to be integrated with children in care. So that was a new area for us to achieve that good judgment in its own right, which clearly happened. And what you can see on that slide is just some quotes, really. One includes a quote from a young person and what was said to inspectors, but also from the inspection report. We did include the inspection report for full transparency so everybody could see exactly what was said. So really good news, and we're going to just say a few things about some of the strengths and areas for development.
So Felicity Groves. We are really proud of this report, and it speaks to the things that we're really passionate about. So the report discussed how when things come in through our front door, children receive the right help in a timely way. So when it's really urgent, they get an urgent response. When it's less urgent, we kind of prioritise accordingly. Our social workers build strong relationships and work in a trauma-informed way with our families, and we provide innovative support such as our fostering family service. And inspectors said that we're really kind of leading the way in terms of changing intergenerational patterns and trying to keep more families and more children at home. And this kind of gives us a really steady foundation as we move into the Families First programme. So we work incredibly hard to try to reduce the number of children coming into care and keep them within their families and within their communities, and we're incredibly proud of that. It also spoke to our robust and meaningful work with children experiencing exploitation. Specifically, some other strengths that were highlighted were our work in relation to domestic abuse and our specific team that works with that, which is our New Way service.
And then just moving on to when children do come into care. So they spoke about how we work hard to establish and identify family networks really early on, so that when children do come in, the majority of children in our local authority actually live with a family member, be it an auntie or a grandmother, etc. And they said that that was really strong. They specifically highlighted the support that our children with a disability receive. And again, they spoke of our kind of creative social work practice that is incredibly relational, and that our social workers are brilliant advocates for the young people they work with, and that extends to the children, the care experienced young people. So care experienced young people have good relationships with their personal advisors, who are incredibly good advocates for them. They spoke about us having a kind of really embedded participation system, so that young people and our parents are constantly feeding back to us. So that's something we were really proud of. They spoke to how we knew ourselves well. So in terms of leadership, they said that they didn't identify anything that we hadn't kind of already identified and weren't working on, which is a real strength. And of course, to finish on in terms of strength, they spoke of the corporate commitment, which is incredible in terms of the people in this room. So thank you to you as well. I'm just going to pass over to Phoebe to talk of some of our areas for development.
So, as Felicity has already mentioned, one of the things we were really pleased and reassured by is that all of the areas that have been named on this slide for our areas of development were areas that we already were aware of. We had identified internally, and there was already work ongoing to address and improve in those key areas. I'll go through each in turn and speak a little bit about the work that's being undertaken in each area. So the first is around the work we undertake for children who have a period of missing, and how we support them to return home, and a process called return home interviews. This was an area we have been working really hard on over the last few years, and Ofsted noted that there had been an improvement in that area because of the activity from the preceding years. So one of the things we had already done is ensure that children who are open to a social worker, it would be the named social worker who had a relationship with the child who now undertakes the return home interview. So there are areas where we've Ofsted already seeing that improvement, and then what we have been doing through a working group in this area is we've established that Felicity is now our named lead for missing young people, so that we've got better strategic oversight for children who are both open to social care, and also the cohort who are not open to social care, who still receive a service through return home interviews. Through the strategic oversight, we've got really good line of sight on what the data is telling us around that cohort, and that means that we can follow up operationally to ensure that they're receiving the right service. And then the third strand is the working group is really looking at how we can streamline the systems and processes around our return home interviews to ensure that they are consistently embedded across the services. So there is some really good work happening, and that piece of work is to make sure that every single child gets a return home interview in a timely way that will benefit them going forwards. So that's a really positive piece of work that's going on. The second is around our local offer. So this is for children who are care experienced, and particularly thinking about the children who are post-21. So what Ofsted are identifying is that the offer and the arrangements are positive in that when young people over 21 are accessing support from their PA, they have really, really strong relationships. The PAs know them, they understand their needs, and they advocate for them really strongly. The bit that we are working to strengthen is thinking about how we articulate our offer so that every care experienced young people knows what is available to them, and when they want to access it, they know that they can come back and request that. So that's thinking about how we use our app, which has our local offer on an app, and using that technology to think about how we communicate push notifications to that cohort, because it reaches all of them collectively, so that we're communicating well and articulating what's available. There's also a working group around our care experienced young people and strengthening various aspects of the support available to them, so thinking about the emotional health offer, for example. And I think it's fair to say there's a group of people strategically within that group who are incredibly passionate about doing the best we can for our care leavers. So, yeah, lots of optimism in that area. And the third strand is around management oversight and supervision. This is an area we were conscious of, and what I would like to offer reassurance is that there are, in most situations, that there is really strong line of sight from our managers that they have a direct influence on the planning for our children. They know where the vulnerabilities are, and they're working really hard to support teams. And that management oversight spans all the way up to assistant director and director level, where we've got our most vulnerable or at-risk children. What we are conscious of, though, and is articulated in the report, is that we need to ensure that that's really well documented on children's files. So sometimes with the children we talk about a lot, there is management activity on their files, but not every single conversation that has been had in a supervision or a management decision. So that's the task for us that we've been working really hard on, is how do we embed the right systems to ensure that the management oversight is really visible on children's files, so that journey is evident. And one of the barriers to that over the last few years has been that we haven't had the right reporting, so that we can see where those gaps are and attend to them in a timely way. And we are really pleased that just after Ofsted had left, unfortunately, the report was finally made available to us. So the team have been working really hard on that in the background. And now we've got that data reporting capability. It means that we've got much more clarity on where we need to ensure that we are both having supervision and management oversight, but making sure it's recorded, so that as a whole system, as a group of managers, we can take that forward in hopefully a relatively easy way. So that's a summary, and welcome any questions.
I'll make the last couple of points. So we need to submit an improvement plan around those three key areas to Ofsted by the 21st of November. Beyond that, we will expect another focused visit within 18 months and another inspection within 3 years. And in between that, we update our self-evaluation, and we have an annual engagement meeting with senior Ofsted colleagues as a way of monitoring and supporting our continued progress.
Thank you. And that's really useful to have the summary. It would be, obviously, for the panel's perspective, useful to have had these slides maybe beforehand, but thank you for going through them now. Liz.
Thank you. First of all, can I say well done? I mean, this is an absolutely fantastic report to get good in every area. It means the team has worked incredibly hard. There are no major weaknesses anywhere in any of the provision that we're offering. So all I can say is well done, and we look forward to seeing the improvement plan in November, unless you have to wait for it to be ratified and then it comes back to us maybe in January. And thank you for highlighting the areas that need improving, because there's so much that's so very good about this report. But there are areas, and I think the report stresses that in some cases it's just a small number. But whoever wrote the report, was it you, Jean? You were very honest about things that needed improving. I don't know whether it was your name is at the report, but the first one was about children going missing. And you have said that there are strategies to deal with when these children return and how they have improved. But the report says there are strategies there, but they're still not making a difference. So is that still current, or was that written before you feel the strategies are in place and are working? Because that's quite damning in one way. So I'll ask my other questions in a moment and give you a chance to reply to that.
So the report was very much a team effort, but I think the importance of being transparent and honest is we want people to know exactly where things are. I'd say that the reason for putting that is because we're judged good and we want to be better than good. And that means doing it well for every child. And therefore our ambitions are high in getting that right. And being able to evidence the impact will take a bit of time. And I think it's more about that, to really know that what we've changed and what we've embedded is then successful every single time for children. So it's having high expectations and therefore challenging ourselves in those high expectations.
So do you think your strategies are going to improve?
We
Because
believe they will. Yeah, we believe they will, but it will take time for us to be able to say that with absolute confidence.
My next question is about children aged 16 and 17 who present as homeless and received a needs-led focus to their situation. But the response here is that these responses were out of date. Now, what would you say to that? Again, that's very illuminating to say, well, we're responding, but they are out of date.
We actually believe there was a... That's it. Oh,
Okay, Paul, would you like me to ask my question again? Okay. In the report, it states that children aged 16 and 17 who present as homeless receive a needs-led focused approach to their situation, but the process for these 16 and 17-year-olds is out of date. So to actually say that in the report, I mean, it's very honest, can I just say, you know, but to actually say that, we need some information about that.
We actually believe there was a miscommunication around the policy, so we believe they've possibly viewed an outdated policy. Having reviewed it immediately after the inspection, we clarified that there is an up-to-date policy which uses the up-to-date law and language. So we have created a task to review that again to make sure it's absolutely on point, but we are reassured that the right policy is in place.
Right, thank you. That's reassuring, so thank you for that. And there are other questions about management and overseeing of reports and things like that, which I think you have addressed. Thank you for that. But the final question, final two questions. One is, you mentioned one of the areas to improve is when young people reach 21. They choose to continue to access their PA, but a small number of very vulnerable young people who would benefit from support don't have an allocated PA. So some inconsistency in how this has been improved, in how this has been communicated. So you didn't quite say what you're doing about this.
So to start with, those young people, young adults who reach 22, in fact, have a choice as to whether they access leaving care services. And that's why the point that Phoebe made earlier about making sure our local offer of the range of opportunities remains really available and transparently and visible kind of to them as they may need it. So our statutory duty in terms of allocating a PA, personal advisor, on an ongoing basis ends at the day of the 22nd birthday, and then it really is a choice. So and we do support young people over that age. There is a group of young people we do, and when young adults return to seek that support, we do offer it and continue to offer it as long as they need that for, subject to an initial conversation and assessment of how we can support. So it's very much in place. I think the issues in the inspection raise how obvious is it to those young adults once they move on from our statutory responsibilities to continue to be able to access it, which are our extended legal duties to them. So if they need that service, we are legally obliged to assess and support them to obtain that.
Thank you. One very final question. We've been our best, Bob. I know I have spoken to social workers who feel they offer over and above, but sometimes they're now being expected to do things that they probably might not be doing. So I might have got that wrong, but you have a fantastic team. I mean, this report reflects that you have an amazing team working with our young people. Will being our best, the implications of it, will it have any impact on the social workers in your team?
We don't expect that it will. What will I think our practitioners and our frontline managers are incredibly dedicated and work incredibly hard to support children, and it doesn't always happen in core hours, it can happen beyond those ordinary office hours. The ways that we're trying to think about how we support workers is to consider how we can use digital innovations, AI, to support some of the things that they do so that their working week is their working week. So, for example, we use a recording system called Magic Notes, which is something that we use to support colleagues to be able to talk into their phone or their laptop once they've undertaken a meeting or an assessment, and that will turn that into a document that they can then edit, review, reduces the amount of administrative time massively in their working week. So combination of thinking about how we can work much more smartly is supporting them to manage a working week that is supportive of what their professional duties and their professional needs are. So it's always been a challenge in social work to manage all of those statutory duties, but we're very mindful of that and very thoughtful about how we support colleagues to do that well.
Thank you, because our retention rate is quite good. You know, we want to retain these social workers without putting too much on them, so thank you for that. I'm sorry, is somebody else going to come and say something?
So on my list I now have Paul and then David and then Onka. So Paul first.
Thank you very much, and thank you for an excellent report and the excellent work that you're all doing. So my question is, on one of the slides there you put up, most children live in safe and suitable homes, and that to me is a really key part of the whole process of care. So my question is, what is most? And how does that compare with other authorities? And what are we doing to get most to 100%?
So we have 116 children who are currently subject to child protection plans. And they are the children who are living at home with their families, where we have assessed that risk is higher than we would want it to be, but where we believe we can really support and work with families to enable children to live at home. And then there's a further group of children who are subject to child in need plans, and that's approximately 600 children at any one time, where they have support needs that are over and above what ordinarily families can work with and support their children in order to meet needs. And if we don't offer that support, for some of those children, those risks can increase in order that they might need to be children who are subject to that safeguarding child protection plan. And that then requires a multi-agency group of colleagues to support those families quite intensively. And beyond that is the group of children that end up needing to be looked after by us. And at the moment, that's 229 children in Bath and North East Somerset, where we have made a decision either to agree that we will look after children for a period of time in a voluntary way, or we have decided that the risk is so great we need to go to court and seek a care order. So you can see that in the context of the population of all of the children in Bath and North East Somerset, the children that we support is a much smaller group of children in that statutory framework. I think in terms of thinking that we will get to being able to meet those children's needs 100%, I don't think that's likely to happen. I think there will always be children at risk of harm, children who need support, and children where the risk is so great we do need to statutorily look to remove them from their parents' care. But I hope that you know from those numbers we try to keep those to the smallest number and only when it becomes absolutely necessary. And we're doing all we can in order to reduce risk, build safety for those children, and as discussed earlier, the Family First reforms really support us to do more of that so that we can offer support earlier and earlier to really maximise the chance of reducing any escalation of the need for support or risk at that statutory and higher level.
Thank you, Jean. So then on my list I have David, Onkar and Leslie. David first.
Thank you for your report. It's really positive and it really is a tribute to the hard work that everyone's done. It's fantastic. Getting to outstanding, what are the resource implications? What do you need?
I'll answer that. Doing the job correctly and being able to prove it shouldn't require additional resources. You have to look at the caseload, look at the changes that are coming through from the government, and under those circumstances there could be implications. It's a service that is incredibly vulnerable to demand, and that demand can go up and down. So my challenge really to Jean has been that we need to be thinking about how do we become outstanding and what the resource implications of that would be. Because we're here because we want to do the best job we can for children. And I think I made the comment earlier on, having the baseline at good is a good start. But I don't think we're going to find a lot of support if we start saying we want millions of pounds extra for this. So what we've got to do is to look at every stage of this improvement plan to find the way that we can actually make it better moving forward. So you're not going to get a fixed figure. I know in the past a figure has been quoted, but that I think is not relevant to the situation we're in today. So I'm not going to be able to give you a specific answer. But, and it is a big but, the drive is there to become outstanding. And if we didn't have that, then I think we would fail.
I'm sure you can rely on us to keep an eye on this. Onkar.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, excellent report. So just a question about the leadership capacity. As new legislative duties under the Families First reform comes in April 2026, so how will leadership capacity be scaled to maintain current service quality without diluting focus on existing improvements, area like RHI audit and case recordings?
So as part of the Family First partnership reforms and our thinking about that, we are looking at what our existing resources, what our capacity is, and as I described earlier, about how we might need to realign and think about how we're well positioned to do what we need to do. We have a strong leadership team, an effective leadership team, and at this moment in time we believe that what we can do is integrate those reforms and the requirements of the reforms into our structures. We need to review our operating model to make sure that we're aligned in the right way to deliver those.
Thank you. Right, I've got Leslie and Kevin, and I've drawn a line under that. Okay, so Leslie first.
Yes, thank you, report. As I said earlier on, I think it is a fantastic achievement. There are, from my identification, 6 sort of areas, six areas that were needing improvements, and I think some of them are not actually too difficult. Some of that is more around the admin and the record keeping, and it does in fact talk about a variability in record quality. However, it does say this is a minority. I've got no idea what that number is on that minority, but it seems to me that that sort of thing is much easier to deal with and manage. The allocated personal advisors, again, it seems more to be about a shortage of them than anything else, so I'm sure that can be dealt with quite easily. The more difficult ones is shortage of suitable homes, especially for children under 10. And then, and we've had this before and talked about this before, the need for adult care professionals being involved early enough during the transition to adulthood. So those are the bigger ones to look at. And will these be included in the plan? I know you said you picked out the 3 items you're going to report back on in November. The other thing I wanted to pick up was the equality impact assessment, because it seems to me that the action plan is sort of missing from it. Yeah, there's just a very, very small item in there. And where it talks about in the 3rd column around, you know, what are the mitigations, what are the action plans, there's not a lot there. And I think that's important. So, 1, this is on sex. So it says social workers need to understand the impact of domestic abuse. It doesn't say anything about improving training. It's that kind of thing that needs a bit more detail. The other thing I'm a little bit concerned about is there seems to have been a shift in language. So we have in the past used disabled people, but what seems to be creeping in is young people with disabilities. Or a parent or child has a disability. The Ofsted report doesn't use that language. The Ofsted report talks about disabled people. That, for me, very much demonstrates using a medical model if we're talking about people with disabilities, not recognising the barriers that disabled people have. And the final thing I just wanted to pick up on, the report itself is shifted into an inaccessible or a less accessible format because it's justified on both sides, and usually we don't have that. Here we have it justified on the left, which is then easier to read. So can that go back to that? Thank you.
If I may, I'll try to answer each one in turn. So starting with sufficiency. So we take this really seriously, and it's a national challenge. It's not a local challenge, and as a result, it does need a lot of attention on a local basis because it's of the national context that we're working in. So we have identified a sufficiency work stream, and that will look at a number of elements of sufficiency. So thinking about how we recruit and retain in-house foster carers so that we can enable more of our children to be placed locally to us with foster families that we support. Looking at our residential capacity and thinking about what we want and need locally. And also some other elements. So we've started to think about what short break provision looks like for disabled children in our area. So that work is underway, and we are well supported by, some of you may be aware, we've got an interim assistant director for transformation because of the additional activity across a number of these streams, but including sufficiency. Paula Sumner is in that role, and she is assisting with that work to provide the capacity required. The comments around record keeping, I would agree that we're reassured that it's easier for us to address record keeping than it would be for us to address culture. And actually what's reflected in this is the way in which our practitioners are supporting families and interacting with families is really positive and reflects excellent practice. So some of this is about ensuring that the work that is happening is actually just making it consistently onto the file. And we know that there are, in the majority of circumstances, children's files do really well reflect the work that's undertaken, the decisions that are made about those children, and the journeys for those children. So our work now is to make sure that happens on every single child's file. So that's for us across the management team that we're working on collectively with our practitioners. I absolutely acknowledge the points around language and also making the report accessible. That's a helpful reminder to us, and we take on board the need to make sure there's consistency around the use of disabled young people and disabled people. And in terms of the action plan, we can absolutely add that and bring more to that. I don't know whether you want to say anything. I think you made a note of the work around domestic abuse. I don't know whether you want to add to that now.
Apologies. It would just be to say, I think, in section 3.2 of the report, in terms of equality impact assessment, we did discuss that we've got a domestic abuse stakeholder event in November, which is kind of relaunching how we're working as a multi-agency group in relation to domestic abuse. And we've also spoken about some new practice guidance we've implemented at the tail end of last year in relation to working with fathers. And we've got some Stand Against Racism and Equality sessions coming up that are specifically regarding both domestic abuse and also working with men and fathers to bring them in. So what we try really hard to do in our New Way service, and that was complemented by Ofsted, is to make sure that when there's domestic abuse in a family, we're not just working with a mother, we're making sure that we're working with fathers as well. So I do think this is something that we're really proud of, and was highlighted by Ofsted, but we will continue to improve.
Jean.
So we will undertake further work on our equalities impact assessment. Thank you for the feedback. The other point that was made, though, was around a transition to adulthood, and there is a transition to adulthood work stream. We're working very closely, and have been for a while, with our adults colleagues in order to ensure a seamless transition for a range of children, so disabled children, but also our care experienced young people who require an adult social care response. So that work is underway. Again, it might be something that you want to hear about as part of the forward plan. We'd be very glad to share that jointly with our adults colleagues.
Yeah, can I just add that we had a survey that was done probably about a year ago now jointly by Ofsted and CQC, looking at the transitions. We were the one authority chosen in the Southwest to do that, to help the government think about how those transitions can be developed further as time goes on. And I think that the reason they chose here is the relationship between the adult services and children's services is really positive. And, you know, it's really nice. This committee sees adults, then it sees children, but the reality is we do work really closely together. And I think that's an important issue, because I've seen in other local authorities where that's not as healthy as it is in this authority.
Thank you, Paul. Very helpful intervention as well. Okay, so my last speaker is Kevin.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of things. The first was, I'm not sure whether I heard it correctly, when you mentioned that the Ofsted were looking at an out-of-date policy and that there was a current policy in place. And was that notified to them as a point of accuracy, because they shouldn't put something in a report that's not accurate?
We have since informed them of the correct policy in our annual conversation. In the time period where the report was published, we hadn't managed to clarify which policy they had looked at that stage. So that's why it wasn't rectified within that report, but they have since been updated.
Okay. And my other question was just around on page 58, where you 1.2, this is about a service improvement plan from November 25. Is that the same thing as we're going to be with the Ofsted action plan, or are the two things separate and they're both going to come to us at some point?
Just one document.
Just one document with the Ofsted inside it. Yep, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and thank you very much for your presentations as well. Okay, so the next item is the attendance and exclusions and report. So, Sarah, before you get started, are you going to add anything to what we've already got before us?
I'm happy to perhaps just identify a few strengths, a few areas for improvement. I appreciate I've had some questions from the floor this morning I said I'd address.
If you want to, start by addressing those, I think that'd be really helpful, but I better just turn to the cabinet member and see if there's anything he wanted to say before you did.
No, let's move on. Sarah sat here quietly all morning, so I think it's important that we have the proper scrutiny of this report. And I think it's been asked for several times by the committee chair.
Okay, so I'll make it a whistle-stop tour. So I did introduce myself earlier, but Sarah Gunner, I'm your virtual school head teacher, but I also oversee the attendance and welfare support service, and I also allocate day 6 within the alternative learning team, so that's why I'm presenting on suspensions and exclusions. I appreciate I've given you quite a lot of data in the report. My background is as a science teacher, and it didn't feel right to give you the outcomes without giving you all of the data as well. But I am only going to pick out some really key things for you. I would also just draw your attention to the fact the data I've given you is our published data. It comes from the national statistics and also from our strategic evidence base. And there is a year lag in this data, so the data is rightly for 23-24, but I have referred in several places to some of our internal data for the last academic year. So just very quickly then, your Attendance and Welfare Support Service oversee attendance for the local authority. They meet with every single school every term, and they have targeted support meetings, and they put in plans for all young people who are suffering from either severe or persistent absence. And it's worth raising that for the first time last year, not only was this was also for all of our independent schools as well. You've already heard some of the outcomes from our ILAC inspection, but it is worth raising here that your Attendance and Welfare Support Service were identified in the inspection, and the inspector said that education leaders have robust systems in place to monitor the safety and well-being of children who are missing education. We were really impressed with this, we were really pleased. I'll take robust any day, but I would also highlight that during our verbal feedback, they actually referred to it as immense, which we slightly prefer. I'd also raise with you that your Attendance and Welfare Support Service last year worked with the DFE, and they led learning sets across the whole of England around good practice. And this was something the DFE asked them to do based on the outcomes that we've received. So overall, as you've got in my report, there's really positive attendance. I've reported around persistent absence, severe absence, and unauthorised absence. And in all of these key areas, we were below the regional data, which is hugely positive. And for most of these areas, again, we were below the national area or in line. When we have a look at our specific vulnerable groups, I'm not going to go through each one, but we have harnessed the expanded work from the virtual school to really target school attendance for those most vulnerable with a social worker. And you'll see there's an improved attendance for those open to children need and children looked after. When we have a look at our children open to protection plans, you will see that their severe absence again has dropped. So it's gone from 21% to 15%, but we know that their persistent absence still remains too high. When we have a look at ethnicity, and here I've used the DFE reporting groups, So when we look at those of our young people who sit in the ethnicity of major mixed, they are more likely to be persistently absent, and those who sit within major black or major mixed are more likely to be severe absent. So we're working really hard with our Race Equality Charter Group to make sure that in every school in Baines we are embedding our race charter. And part of this charter asks schools to really unpick their data and to report around any key trends around ethnicity. And this is something Attendance and Welfare Support Service are asking them to do on a termly basis. Our greatest challenge has already been discussed here quite a lot this morning, and that is for our pupils who are open to free school meals. You'll be aware of the research that's gone into, particularly closing the attainment gap, and if some of these strategies were embedded, this would also directly impact on school attendance. But this remains a key focus for us within our MATs, but also within our regional office. If I can then quickly move to suspensions and exclusions, I've included for you some of the national data here, which is not a pretty outlook. When we look at the national data, you'll see that there is a 21% increase in suspensions and 16% increase in permanent exclusions, which is a growing negative picture for our young people. That said, in terms of our data for 23-24, we were one of the only local authorities to see a real drop in our permanent exclusion rates, which is something we are exceptionally proud of and actually acknowledges the hard work across all of children's services, because not one person or one school can do that alone. If we have a look across all of our vulnerable groups, you will see that the number of permanent exclusions has fallen in all cohorts. And again, if I refer to our internal data for last year, you'll see again there's another reduction in the number of permanent exclusions. If I move on to suspensions, this is not quite such a positive picture, and this is our area to really target. And again, I will just draw you back to the national trend, which shows a 21% increase in suspensions. But our suspensions data does sit above national and regional, and it has done for several years. The only area where it doesn't sit above national and regional is for our children who are looked after. But in every other vulnerable group, we do see an increase in suspensions. So clearly the message that I know you asked me to address earlier on, and what you're clearly going to ask me, is what are we actually doing about this? So first of all, I will highlight that this doesn't sit solely within the local authority, but clearly it comes to really strong partnership work with our multi-academy trusts and our regional director's office. The area we're working really hard on is to get in early, to identify needs and to identify difficulties when they occur. We've worked really hard to make sure not only do we have suspension data for every single school, but we have it down to the individual pupil level. So for any child who's received more than one suspension, our inclusion and send service, and please note the change in name there, so we've moved from send and AP service to inclusion and send service. Our inclusion and send service will go into schools and look at the plan that's available for them. Also within the virtual school, again, we have advisory teachers who are going in to support alongside our social workers to really target young people with a social worker who are at risk of suspension and exclusion. We've changed the way that our inclusion panels work across the local authority, and we've also developed a system called the 4 tiers of support. So we ask all schools to look at how they're supporting young people, and we're encouraging MATs to do exactly the same. So not only is there a local area offer of support, but also one from the Multi-Academy Trust. We have to meet in the middle to work together to bring these suspensions down. We've listened to schools who said that sometimes referring into the local authority can be confusing, and from the 1st of November we're having a one area, a one front door, where any school can refer in to access support for young people. We welcome the new Ofsted framework for schools, which highlights inclusion and how local authorities and school leaders are working together. We're also offering for any school a team around the school. So for schools that have a high number of suspensions or we have concerns about, we are working alongside the school and their multi-academy trust with services across the whole of children's services to build that cohesive response. We have a strategic group within the local authority to lead on suspensions and exclusions, again, pulling together the resources that we have to make sure we're not overlapping in any areas. And finally, we're working really hard with the Race Equality Task Group and looking at the Race Charter to really embed and look at our trends around ethnicity. That was a very quick whistle-stop tour.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Questions that haven't yet been answered? Liz and Kevin?
Well, firstly, that's a really excellent report, Sarah, and I'm not surprised as Special School Head, as I've known you for many years, and the transformation you've brought to children looked after and their education outcomes, and the lack of fixed-term exclusions and suspensions with that cohort has been amazing. You've worked miracles there, but I'm not sure how many miracles you're going to be able to work here, because it's very difficult, isn't it? Because partly we're dealing with multi-trust academies, and it's very difficult to get your foot in the door. It looks like you've started to try and do things. One cohort that springs to mind, and I wonder how difficult it will be to reach them, is the attendance of free school meal children, because we're talking about mixed ethnicity and things like that that can be targeted. But that's my first question about free school meals children. And if I can just ask you just one other, and I'm sure there are lots of others that people are going to, that fellow committee members are going to ask. It's about the suspensions. I mean, it's really good to see the permanent exclusions going down, because that really has a big impact on children's life and young people's life outcomes. So that's really good. But I read with horror that from 2023 to 2024, 4,000 odd of our young people were suspended, and 1 year later it was more than double that. Now, you've talked about what you might be doing, so I just wonder, we had a pre-meeting discussion, and at that pre-meeting discussion we were talking about schools and how, with perhaps some of the children and young people in their cohorts, that they have to suspend them because there is no alternative. Now you're talking about one-door entries, that one sort of, some sort of support that there will be for schools. So I just wonder, firstly, about free school meals attendance, and then suspensions. How can we tackle this huge number of suspensions, which I'm sure is nationwide as well? So thank you.
Thanks, Liz. And I kind of wish I had all the answers. In terms of our free school meal cohort, it's something we bring to School Standards Board regularly, and we're making sure that it does sit within their improvement plans as well. But again, it's around us all working together to really improve outcomes. In terms of the service that I oversee, in terms of the attendance and welfare support service, I can ask for that highlights to be there in every meeting that they have. I don't know, Chris, if you want to add anything more widely around free school meals.
Only that it's also a regional priority. It's something that's akin to the southwest, so it's not a great pattern across the whole of the southwest. So there is a regional approach to attendance. In terms of the region, Baines has actually bounced back quicker in terms of the overall attendance, and absenteeism than most of the LAs, but the persistent area for us is free school meals across the southwest. So there's a lot of work from the regional director's office, working with trusts and working with local authorities to do that work. It's part of the work of our disadvantage group as well. So we have a disadvantage group which reports to School Standards Board, which is all the disadvantage leads from all the trusts, and they're going to be looking at a piece of work about actually where's the best practice around attendance for those groups and trusts and how we can replicate it. So, akin to Sarah, I don't have the absolute magic bullet around that one, but it's really important if we want to link the improvement we want for our disadvantaged cohort, particularly in Key Stage 2, and the attendance. It goes hand in hand. As Sarah has told me numerous times, those first phonics lessons and reception happen first thing in the morning most of the time. So if those children are late or not in, they're going to be missing out on those really important activities. So it's a real priority for us, but we haven't got a bullet yet. But we're working on it.
And in reference to your question around suspensions, and it was interesting, Councillor Harman, when you said there is no other option but to suspend. I always think there's another option other than to suspend, and that is the key. It's getting in as early as possible. We know we have some new services, so in terms of our extended work around the virtual school and where that's going, in terms of our inclusion and SEND support service, in terms of the work that we're doing alongside social workers, it's around schools knowing where that advice is and what they can do at an earlier stage, but also Matt saying to us what are they doing at an early stage to prevent exclusions and suspensions, because it's not just a local authority responsibility. And that's often one of my very first questions when a head teacher calls me in and says, what's the local authority doing about this? I will always say, and what is the Multi-Academy Trust doing to prevent this suspension and exclusion as well? So there's part of me that says we need to let some of these new systems embed. We know we're also rolling out more training this year around developing a trauma-informed approach. We know that if our schools were more trauma-informed and more inclusive, that young people would be in education and not being suspended. So again, I really hope that I come back to you next year with a more positive picture, but it is one of our biggest significant challenges.
I have every confidence in you, Sarah, so thank you.
Right, on my list I have Kevin, Leslie and David, and I think I'm going to draw a line under that, okay?
Thank you, Chair. Sarah, I quite, just an aside to your last point, yeah, I do understand that you always try everything else first, but I also say resources, and particularly at the moment in the current funding climate, it is desperate. Even the local authority sent around a letter to heads recently saying Ed Sykes will be pulled away to do statutory work for a while, and it is being felt everywhere. And actually, it often is. How do we cope with these children and we have no other way of getting support for them? So I take your point, but I also want to make another point. Just a couple of things around your data, and thank you for, as always, a very comprehensive report. On 3.5, about reasons for pupils with EHCPs having absence authorised, and would you expect to have EHCP children have more authorised absence? And the other question was just really around the public health team and the wider determinants of attainment. And does this come into your workings at the moment on supporting children and, if you like, getting in early on lots of situations that may affect attendance and suspension?
Thank you. So the first point around EHCPs and authorised absence, it is often a pattern that we see. So young people who have EHCPs may well have more medical appointments, or they may well have more time out of school. And clearly that's one of the roles of the Attendance and Welfare Support Service, to look at the reasons why absence is being authorised and to make sure it is for those reasons. So I think, as I raised in my report, whilst the absence for this cohort is higher than perhaps we'd like, it is authorised. It would worry me more if it was unauthorised absence. In terms of the wider determinants, we have been heavily involved in terms of the work that the public health have been doing. But in terms of where we kind of take this forward, at the moment, it's just my oversight of the Attendance and Welfare Support Service. We will work alongside the public health and some of those wider initiatives, but at the moment, I don't know where we are with those.
Sorry, can you repeat that bit of the question? It's related to the wider determinants bit.
Yeah, I mean, Chris, there's a number of initiatives that have been brought to panel, which is fantastic, whether it's the empowerment projects and other things, and it's how these things are coming together, because obviously the end of the line is exclusion and suspension, if you like. So it's what's happened way back there and is happening here to see where that can be affected.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a number of strategies the local authority has been working on the last few years. So the offer from the local authority around exclusions, attendance and SEND is so much more than it used to be over the last few years. There's been significant investment in frontline services, and Sarah's overseen the development of some of that work, some of those services. So when we need to provide additional support to schools and trusts, we can do that now through the Send and Inclusion Service. And Sarah's talked about us making sure that we've got one front door so schools know where to get access and support for that. And that'll tie in with the work with Families First, we're doing on there. So we're really confident in the local authorities' offer around what we offer to schools now in terms of where we were 2 years ago. We've got support and advice around behaviour, training and CPD offers, and there's a lot more that schools can access outside of what they should also be able to access from their trusts. And I think Sarah's right, we need to be really clear that it isn't just about the local authority. The work that's been done to complement some of our work has been looking at those wider determinants, so what happens outside of school. So we've got an action plan which has been brought here, and you've seen that, and that's about actually what can we do in thinking about planning policy, what we're going to do when we're thinking about delivery of leisure services, all those things which make up around a wider child's life. And we work very much closely hand in hand with the public health team in helping them deliver that, in the hope that we are providing a wide range of better services and planning services much more effectively for those most disadvantaged people in our local authority.
Okay, Leslie, and then finally David.
Yes, again, thank you for the report. There's some really good news in this. On the other hand, we're still where we are in terms of exclusions for what the report calls ethnicity disparities. If you look at this census, it always surprises me, or maybe not, that we have around 2.7% what's described as people in an ethnic group in Bath and North East Somerset, and yet we managed to exclude more of them from schools than anybody else. And I just don't know why this keeps happening. So one of my questions is, how is that going to look at what helped to bring the figures down in the first place, and how can those interventions then help to bring them down for this group as well? And how is the council supporting schools to reduce the severe absences among not just those pupils but others as well? On the equality impact assessment, again, there's some gaps in it that shouldn't be there. It talks about the strategic evidence base not having the information. Well, why not? And who, and I don't think you can answer this, Sarah, but you know, who can make sure that information goes in there? So if you look at gender reassignment, it says there's no data on the education outcomes from this group. But this is a group that seems to be growing. If you go to any Pride event, you will see the number of young people, I'm talking under secondary school age, who seem to be identifying around that group nowadays. So it's a concern to me that we don't have that information. And from personal experience, I know two people who've transitioned over the last year, young people. One of them was in secondary school, and they were, again, persistently absent because they wouldn't get out of bed, and while the parents did everything they could to try and get to the bottom of all this, it eventually emerged that they were transitioning, and they have, in fact, now transitioned, although they are only 17 now, but only just. So there is information there. Sometimes it's not easily available, but it's how can we find this information out and make sure that these impact assessments really are meaningful and have evidence of the negative or adverse impacts and the actions around that. So again, I'm not going to go through it in detail. There's areas where it says not applicable. I'm not quite sure why that is. And there are a couple of items in the action plan, but I think more needs to be in there to show what we're trying to achieve and perhaps how we can achieve it. Thank you.
Thank you. So in terms of our ethnicity and that pattern, Again, this is a report, I think we talk about it much more widely than we ever have done, and I think that's something that we have tried to embed over the last 18 months. And what I would say is that I think this probably sits with our suspension and exclusions steering group around how we are going to work, looking, and it would be a good item for our next agenda to really think about how we have reduced permanent exclusions and how we may be able to link this into some of our ethnicity trends. We work really, really closely with Jason Pegg from Black Families around this and thinking about actually how we can get Jason into schools much earlier as well to look at these trends that we have. In terms of how we are going to reduce severe absences, again, it will always depend on the reason for a severe absence, whether it's medical, whether it's due to unmet needs. There's a whole reasons and a whole list around that. And again, I think that sits with our attendance and welfare support service to really unpick with schools why young people are missing and to make sure the quality of those plans are really good. And I take all of your points around the equalities report. We don't currently have data around gender reassignment, but it certainly could be something we could ask the BI team to have a look into.
Okay, David, I think you have the last set of questions.
Thank you. Thank you for your report. Can I just clarify? Are multi-academy trusts suspending more children pro rata than you would expect? Or I guess you know what I'm asking.
I think we have to be careful about the term than I would expect. Everybody here would love it if none of our children were either permanently excluded or ever suspended. But then it comes back to Kevin's point also around sometimes the only option may be to suspend, although I struggle to take that. It's something we always review with our multi-academy trusts around their suspension data. It's something we ask them to report on at School Standards Board. And I come back to the fact that our data shows we're above regional and national, which isn't a place that we want to be. So we have to get our suspension data down.
Thank you. Very diplomatic.
Can I just make a further comment, which is perhaps a little bit... the regional figures in the southwest are higher than the national figures, and that tells you something about the nature of multi-academy trusts in the southwest, which are higher than other areas. And I've made my politics always very clear about this. I still hanker back for the days when we had an education authority, but the simple fact is the multi-academy trusts are there. They're in a competitive marketplace, and they tend to deal with things as they see fit. We have to try and train, work with them to actually bring those figures down. But I think it's a good question.
Thank you. Just going back to the wider determinants in public health, autumn term 2024-25, the national overall absences were 6.4%. 3.3% of those, i.e. the majority, were from illness. I was just wondering if we could have a follow-up report maybe in 2 months' time on illness since about 2018 and see where we're going with that. Because a lot of the illness levels have been related to the onset of the pandemic but have not come down. And aside of, as far as I can see, sending kids to school with colds and coughs, seems to be the only intervention that's coming down from on top to try and get kids' attendances up.
Yes, I'm more than happy to provide a report for you.
Thank you, Sarah. Okay, that ends that item. I'm now going to move on to the panel work plan. So there will have been a number of items that we have spoken about that we want to see coming back. And thank you, all the officers who volunteered to come back as well. Right, is there anything else anybody wants to raise? I know outside of this meeting, and it might have been because I think Friday was the national focus on suicide. I think that was an item that I would have expected to see on the work plan, but I don't think is on the work plan. I think normally Paul Scott comes and delivers an update on that. Is there anything else anybody's noted that's missing? I know that we spoke before about long COVID, and I think that fits in with your question just now. So I think we should bring that in, and perhaps that also fits with a bit of a focus on public health as well. Liz.
Put it down, but dementia strategy update.
Okay, yes, I think it's on there. The dementia strategy as well. Kevin?
Looking back at would look like something around Baines Inequalities funding, the actions and outcomes, which might have been a Laura one, and the food access toolkit, the impact of the project was supposed to be coming back at some point.
Okay, well, we'll make a note of those as well.
Chair, can I suggest perhaps we just turn the equalities round into an inclusion report that we bring back at some stage in the future? I think that would be something more positive.
Yes, that sounds much more appropriate. Okay, thank you. Good suggestion. Okay, obviously, as usual, if there's anything that you realise is missing, that you think should be on the work plan, then let myself and Mark know. And then finally, well, no, penultimately, the minutes from the last meeting. Any errors on that?
I sent an email to you about end of life and cancelling council tax, and that doesn't seem to be on the work plan.
We'll pick that up and we'll discuss that, I think, in our chairs meeting. Yeah. So I think there's some cross yeah, okay. It's something that we were going to discuss, so yes. It hasn't been forgotten, Joe. Put it that way. Right, so go back to the minutes. Any errors? Is this an error? Okay.
Thank you, Chair. So it's on page 15, right at the bottom. This is in reference to the Adult Social Care Improvement Plan, and I asked around the Equality Impact Assessment because it was focused on staff, and I asked there would be, no, I asked when one would be provided for service users. It's been recorded as I asked if a separate one was required, which I didn't say. I asked for it to be provided.
Thank you for the correction. Any other errors? Okay. In that case, taking into account that particular correction, is everyone happy to say that they're okay? Yeah. Splendid. Right, okay. And then we move on to the absolute last item, which is the next meeting, which will be on, I forgot what date it is. I know it's in November. My apologies for this part. 17th. Thank you very much, Chris. On the 17th of November, which will have a focus on adult services. So thank you, everybody, for your attending this meeting, and I look forward to seeing you at our next